Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. I know y'all feel like you were just hanging out with us because we were on all day yesterday. 5+ hours on Irish Breakdown, then another 3 hours on the Lucky Lefty podcast. I slept in a little bit today, and it's another day to rock and roll, Ryan, and another day of absolute drama in the Peyton Bowen situation. We're not going to dive into that other than he ain't coming to Notre Dame. And if you want to get into it more than that, we got an update on the message board. It's not even worth talking about. It's literally him doing the exact same thing yesterday that he did the day before signing day, saying one thing to one group and another thing to another group. And then I'm so over talking about him. And we're going to focus today, the rest of this show, on what they landed. Yesterday was a great day. I think we had a great chance to show Notre Dame fans the kind of young men and the kind of families that they're bringing into Notre Dame. And today it's about analysis. We're going to analyze the good, the bad, the ugly. There's a lot of good about this class. We're going to go position by position, breaking it down. We'll kind of start big picture offense, then positions, big picture defense, then positions, and go from there, Ryan. So I think overall, I looked at some of the rankings today, and I'm just going to say this. There are not 5 classes in the country that I would trade for this Notre Dame class. And anyone that says otherwise, you're just not going to convince me otherwise. This is a class overall, met all their needs, impact players at many different positions, great depth in a class that it is a gap closing class. Did it close the gap as much as it could have? No. Have they completely erased the gap? No way. But this class moves Notre Dame just another step closer. And when you combine it with last year's class, which we'll do a 2-year grade show coming up here very soon as well, this class, it moved the needle. With all the obstacles that were in front of the staff, Ryan, at the end of the day, when you look at this class as a whole, this is a top 5 class to me, and I don't care what anybody says. Except you, of course.
We heard yesterday from Tom Leving about how arbitrary the star system is, right, and how flawed it is, and that's all those rankings are based upon, is what your star ranking is and what your, the number associated with a certain number in a class, and it's flawed because it's pertinent to someone's rankings that is not your own, right? And at the end of the day, you have built this platform because we think for ourselves, right? We give our own analysis and we build upon that scope and that's foundation, right? So we're going to be real with everyone to say, were there misses? Of course, there's no doubt. And we'll talk about those, I'm sure, sometime, during this show, obviously. But we're clouding our judgment if we're going to just push aside and be like, oh, this is a typical Notre Dame class. No, it wasn't. It wasn't. Notre Dame took a massive step forward, in my opinion. Marcus Freeman showed that what you can do on the recruiting trail with tremendous effort. He showed that. And even despite going against obstacles like the NIL era and some late minutes, some late minutes bidding wars for players, Notre Dame stood tall and signed 24 guys that I think made their football team tremendously better going into 2023. So I'm excited for those kids. I'm excited for the future of Notre Dame football. I'm excited for Marcus Freeman and his staff. I think when we look back on it, we're going to say, wow, the 2023 class was a special group. That group had a chance to catapult us to where we want to be.
Ryan, I think when you look at this class, obviously the offensive class, we're going to dive into the offense now. Mm-hmm. And when you look at the offensive class, for me, it was one of those classes where that was the one that was the bigger concern coming in. And when I say concern, it's more about you did not have a great offensive class last year. There were parts that were really good. The tight end class, really good. Love Jadarian Price. Offensive line class had some talent, but you came up short with your top quarterback targets. You came up woefully short in numbers at receiver, even though I loved the one they got, right? You came up way short, and it's just been a side of the ball that's just been really inconsistent for a while. Great one year, not the next. Guys not panning out, guys not being coached. A lot of issues on that side of the ball. They needed a deep year on offense. And this group showed kind of why we always say, let it play out, right? Just be patient. There was a time when everybody was worried about how this class was going to look on offense, but it's all about how you finish, right? And this offensive class, in my opinion, finished extremely well. There were some losses along the way, but the losses were from guys that from a numbers and need standpoint were beyond what the needs were. That has to be considered. And as you evaluate and grade a class, there's 3 ways to evaluate it. Number 1 is, did you meet your needs? Okay. Needs are from this standpoint, it's looking at number 1. There's 2 aspects to need. Number 1 is numbers. I mean, that's just flat out. You need X numbers at a position.
Right.
The second part is type needs. Hey, look, tight end, for example, we'll get into. Cooper Flanagan isn't just a player on a board that checks a box. You landed one tight end. You needed a specific type of tight end, and the question is, does Cooper Flanagan meet that need? And I would say yes. So that's the second part of it. And then it's also positional need. You can get 4 defensive linemen, but if your 4 defensive linemen can only play one position, you didn't really meet your needs. Those are all things that go into it. That's not what happened. That's just an example. So when I look at this offensive class, the biggest thing for me, Ryan, is they've met their needs numbers wise. They met their needs from what type of players they needed skill set wise and fit into the offense. They met their needs in the type of players they needed from an impact skill set standpoint. And then the second part of evaluating class is based on the talent, gauging the talent of the group. And then the final part is fit, right? You could land the best quarterback in the country, but if the best quarterback in the country is a run, throw, spread guy, and you're signing him to run Paul Chryst Wisconsin offense, may not be a great fit, right? So fit is the third part. So when we give our grade, those are the 3 factors. And anyone that's just grading it off of talent is missing the boat. And that ultimately is my biggest issue with recruiting classes. I understand why they have to come up with a points-based system, but there's no way that they have to be able to talk about, did you meet your needs? This player's ranked here, but does he fit what that team does? Right. Those are all things that have to be evaluated to truly properly evaluate, engage, and grade a class. And a points-driven grading system, ranking system doesn't do that. So those are the 3 factors that go into it, Ryan. And when I look at this offensive class, I think they met their needs. They at least got their minimum everywhere. I think that they also landed players that fit the specific needs of the roster from a type of player standpoint. And this is a very talented group, Ryan. So for me, when I give the offense as a whole a grade, I gave it an A-. It wasn't quite as good as it could have been. It wasn't the best 1 or 2 offensive hauls in the country, which is why it's not an A, because the standard for A has got to be top 3 to me, top 3 to 5, but it's on the cusp of 5 to 7 as far as just looking at it as a whole, stacking it up against other classes. It's around a top 4 to 5 class for me, which is right on the cusp of that A. And then to be A+, I've got to be able to look at a class and say, there is literally not a single class better than that one. And they weren't there yet with this group. And so I gave it an A-, and it was definitely a needle-moving class to me. The defense built on what has been happening. The offense, to me, moved the needle at every single position, and that is huge.
Brian, I remember when I was first hired, the only 2 offensive commits in the class at the time were Cooper Flanagan, who we'll talk about during the show, and Cedric Irvin Jr. Those were the only 2 in the class. And at that point, I remember there was a big frenzy on the message board and on Twitter in general from Notre Dame side of things that were like, oh man, this offensive staff can't recruit, they can't do it, right? And the recovery that they've had, man, and there was a big question mark, and I know we'll get into wide receivers specifically, but you brought in a guy like a Chancey Stuckey who had not really recruited before, and you have Tommy that's had, at quarterback has had a couple misses in over the last few years, and there was question marks. And Harry Heastand coming back, and what's his effort going to be like on the recruiting, coming back for a second time at an older age, and there was a lot of question marks. But I think when you look at what this staff was able to accomplish, comparative, especially where they started when I first got here, so far behind the defensive class, and I applaud them. I really did. I don't think there's a hole in this offensive class. I really don't think there is. Could you have upgraded at a couple different spots potentially? Did you miss on a couple? Yes, that's very fair. That's 100%. But regardless, you got really talented football players and you hit all your needs. And that's what Notre Dame needed. They needed numbers at certain positions offensively. They needed talent at every position offensively. And I think they did that. So I think that the staff really rounded out, recovered from a slow early start after the coaching change. I think they put together a very good offensive class. I have no quarrels with the A grade, A minus grade, I should say. I think that it's definitely somewhere in the A range, right? And but to your formula, by how you stack it up, top 3, top 5, kind of your correlating grades, I don't think I can push back on it at all. I really don't.
Right. Because like so the way the grades are just pure. A is elite football playoff caliber. Any A minus to A plus is in that conversation. B is outstanding to top 15 caliber, right? So you kind of got that, if it's going to be a B plus, it means it's kind of probably like 8 to 10. If it's a B, it's like 10 to 12. If it's a B minus, it's like 13 to 15, that kind of thing. C is solid, borderline top 25 caliber. D is subpar, not good enough, and F is a disaster. And so when I look at the A minus grade, Ryan, it's kind of like this is a playoff caliber haul. It's just, if I'm going to set a standard for national championship, it's close, very close to being that. And the only reason I would say it is not there is because I'm evaluating this more so off of the current grade of the players, not so much the upside. Because if we were just going to look at it from an upside standpoint, the way that Notre Dame recruits, we could almost go A plus every year because the upside is there. Well, the reality is not every kid reaches their full potential. And that's why you can't evaluate only on upside. I think this kind of grade needs to be reflected on more of just the natural projection. And so when I look at a guy like Braylon James, I'm not going to grade him the way that I would a Brandon Inniss, who I think is a more of a surefire, higher floor. I think that kid's going to be a really good player, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of their career, could Braylon James be every bit as good, if not better than Brandon is? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And so that's where that mark is like it's an A minus right now because you do look at the upside to a degree. The upside factors into the conversation, but it's not the driving force behind it. It's what I can say definitively I feel comfortable about saying now.
Right.
And that's where I'm at, because if Kenny Minchie and Jeremiah Love and Caleb Smith and Braylon James and Sullivan Absher and Joe Otting and players like that all reach their peak, this is an A to A plus class. But that's a high hit mark. Yes. And most teams don't hit that kind of hit mark in one class. So just so people understand where it's coming from. But if you're in an A minus to range, you've landed yourself a heck of an offensive class. And I think overall too, Ryan, I think Tommy Rees is not getting enough credit from Notre Dame fans for this regard. You need to be able, as a fan, if you're going to properly give analysis and not just be an emotional person. And I think people in this chat and that watch our show want to be challenged and want to think about the game beyond just the emotional part of it. Because if they just wanted to be emotional overreactors, they wouldn't be hanging out on our show. There'd be other places they would hang their time, right?
Right.
So I think when I'm encouraging you to look at it from this standpoint, say, if you think Tommy Rees is a bad offensive coordinator, that's a different conversation for a different day, and that's fair for you to feel that way. Okay, and there's things you can look to and feel a certain way about it. But you have to differentiate yourself between Tommy Rees, the coach, and Tommy Rees, the recruiter. And the reverse would be true too. If Tommy Rees was like a wicked, tremendously successful offensive coordinator as a game planner and play caller, and Notre Dame was scoring 45 points a game, but a garbage recruiter, you should be able to say that too, right? And so he gets hammered a lot for things that I just think are you're putting your feelings about something over here that doesn't have to do with recruiting onto him as a recruiter. Because the reality is the only reason last year's class finished with Tobias Merriweather and Jadarian Price and Billy Schrouth was because of Tommy Rees. Billy Schrouth does not come to Notre Dame if it's not for Tommy Rees. Full stop. Right there. Tobias doesn't stay if that doesn't happen. And so this year he finally was given resources, aka assistant coaches that can recruit. And when you put that together, they really thrived and really shined. And, he deserves a lot of credit for his job as the leader of that group because we hear his name a lot with recruits. But then you can only do so much as an offensive coordinator. And Tommy Rees, as the quarterback's coach, getting Kenny Minchie was huge the way that played out. Dylan McCullough did a great job. I flat out was told that the manner in which Dylan McCullough conducted himself in a truthful manner and the way he went about just treating people with respect like men and being honest and not telling one recruit one thing and another recruit another thing is the reason Jeremiah Love fell in love with him in signing with this class. The reason, right? And then, of course, after that, then it came to, okay, fit and all the other things factored in. But just in an era where you just don't get a lot of honesty and integrity, he showed that with Jeremiah Love, and that's why he's in the class.
Well,
Chancey Stuckey, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I think that is true of most guys that fit well at Notre Dame, though, Brian. I mean, listening to some of them yesterday, right? Like Sullivan Absher, they don't want to be lied to, right? Like these are smart kids. I think that players that are as smart as Notre Dame kids are find it offensive when you lie to them. Like that's what I think they do. You know, they're smart enough to understand you can't BS me, man. You can't. Right. You have to be able to tell me honestly. And I think they also understand that I'm not the best version of myself. I need you to get there, right? So if I can't trust you, how are you going to get me to that point? Jeremiah Love put money on the back burner because Jeremiah Love believes the long term is going to be better than the short term. Well, if you're not going to develop me to be the best possible football player I can be, why would I trust you? Why would I how can I buy into you if that's what I say?
I think it's Chancey Stuckey hit a home run in his first year. It's hard to evaluate Jared Parker because he walked in with Cooper Flanagan already in, and they've kind of focused on 2024. Harry Heastand did a great job with his offensive line class, putting it together, getting guys that he wanted. You can quibble with maybe he should have wanted this guy or that guy. I think the offensive line grade also, that is one where I felt this class had a miss. You know, not getting a second pure tackle was the one thing I could point to and say, you know, this class looks a whole lot different with a Monroe Freeling, with a guy like that, you know, a more natural, an Elijah Page kind of guy. But it's still a very good class, very good offensive line class. It's without question one of the 5 to 6 best offensive line classes in the country. And so I really like it. So you just the coaches as a whole did a great job here. They deserve they deserve praise for it, right? We've spent a lot of time the last couple of years hammering the offensive staff for not doing a good job. This staff came together and did a great job and held strong and had Jaden Greathouse had a lot thrown at him. Braylon James had a lot thrown at him. Jeremiah Love had a lot thrown at him. And those kids were like, no, I want to be a part of what they're building here. And I want to be the foundation of what they're building here. And overall, I think it was a great class.
Yep. I mean, I think it says it perfectly, right? Like you hit all your needs, there's no doubt, but there's impact talent, man. And I think that there is, right? Is there a couple spots just from a team perspective that you could have gotten more impact talent? We'll talk about that, right? Especially on the defensive side of the football. But Notre Dame got guys at running back, wide receiver, maybe quarterback that I think they can come in. Even tight ends. I think that Cooper Flanagan could play a role early on, depending upon what you're asking of him, right? So I think from a skill position perspective, you have impact talent that can come in and can compete early on for whatever role you need them to have in your offense. Offensive line-wise, I think there's a couple of guys that are physically ready to play football at the college level, but that's just kind of a different bag, right? Like they usually are developed a little bit slower. They're not usually pressed into a substantial amount of time early on unless you are a Blake Fisher type and there is that clear need at left tackle, for instance. So I think that for me, Brian, again, there were a lot of question marks about this offensive class, and I already talked about that a little bit, right? Tommy Rees has had misses. Chancey Stuckey is barely recruited. Dylan McCullough is now coming to his biggest job. He recruited pretty well at Indiana, for instance, right? But recruiting at Notre Dame is a little bit of a different bag. And obviously there's been a lot of pushback on Harry Heastand in the past as far as like his want to.
It's always nonsense.
Recruit. It was
always nonsense.
But there's still a narrative out there, and there was a question to be answered. And I think that Harry answered that. I think a lot of the coaches, I mean, one of the first people Tom Lemming talked about yesterday was Chancey Stuckey and how he's a star on the recruiting trail. And it's like this time last year, I mean, he wasn't even hired at this point last year, but when he got hired, you were like, what's his impact going to be? Right. You know, what kind of headway is he going to make? Yeah. He was just an unknown commodity. But now you're going into 2024, like he can go get Ryan Wingo, I think. Like, I think he can get him.
I mean, he needs to. I mean, right, like stacking it on, right?
Exactly.
But for this class, certainly he moved the needle. So let's kind of go into the position by position. It begins at quarterback. There was a huge need at quarterback in this class. They didn't need a body. They needed a guy that you could look at and say, is that the kind of guy that if he ends up winning the job and developing as a player, can go lead you against the Bamas, the Georgias, the Clemsons, the Ohio States, and win games. Not win games in spite of him, but win games because of what he brings to the table. It was a very wild, winding, twisting road, but I think Notre Dame got that guy. And I'm just going to say this right now, Ryan, when I look at it, like the reality is this is a kid that I had graded high before he was a Notre Dame factor. I gave Notre Dame an A- getting Kenny Minchie. I had Kenny Minchie as the number 80 player in the country coming in during the summer on our top 100. That was when he was committed to Pitt, and he had already told Notre Dame at that time that he was going to stick with Pitt. And Notre Dame had already kind of made the move to Austin Novosad at that point in time. And so, but it's just like you couldn't deny the film from his junior year. You couldn't deny the arm talent. You couldn't deny what he did over the summer. You couldn't deny all the things you heard about his IQ. And look, this is one of the best quarterbacks in what at the time was a loaded quarterback class. Now, some of the guys have not panned out as well. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of talk about, well, Notre Dame should have taken Jackson Arnold. Okay, if that's your thing, I get it. And from a recruiting ranking standpoint, taking Jackson Arnold would have been better for Notre Dame. He's like a top 10 kid, according to a couple people. But I'm just telling you all right now, and I've said this from day one. I said this when people thought that Notre Dame was going to get Jackson Arnold. He's not that dude. And so, and I'm not the only one that felt that way. Notre Dame felt that way, which is why Jackson Arnold isn't it. Here's the thing. You should have gone all in on Dante Moore. You should have taken Jackson Arnold because look at Jackson. And I'm like, if Notre Dame thought Jackson Arnold was a top 15 overall player, they'd have taken Jackson Arnold if he wanted to come. They would have. Yeah. But they didn't view him in the same league as Dante. That's why they went with this approach that they went with. And the same thing is true for the Notre Dame staff with other guys. If they thought Chris Vezina was that good, top 25 overall player, they'd have taken him. Mm-hmm. That's just a fact. They went with the Dante Moore because they thought Dante was in a different level than those other guys. And their strategy was, we feel like this is a deep enough class that if we miss on Dante, that they'll get him. And the other thing, too, is they were willing to tell Dante thanks but no thanks when it came down to it, because that's ultimately what happened. Mm-hmm. Because of getting CJ Carr in the 2024 class. I think that's another thing that factors into how impressed I am by getting Kenny Minchie, because Kenny Minchie knows that they're bringing in a dude next year at quarterback. Yep. And he didn't shy away from it. If he didn't want to compete, he'd have just stayed at Pitt. You get to play in the ACC. You know, the quarterback here, you're going to, Phil Jurkovec comes in for a year, you groom, and then you're going, against Christian Velo for the next starting job, who wasn't even in the class at the time? Hard pass, right? I mean, that's an easy one. He could have easily been a 3-4 year starter at Pitt. No problem. He chose to come to Notre Dame and battle against Tyler Buchner and CJ Carr. I think this says a lot about Kenny Minchie and the kind of player he is, Ryan. And the talent is certainly there. It's certainly there. He's got all the arm talent you want to here's the thing, to execute Tommy Rees's offense. Mm-hmm. That's the key.
I mean, he took again, I know it was in limited. I mean, what did he play? 5 games, 6 games as a senior, but he just looked like a different cat, man. And not a different cat mentally or from an accuracy perspective. Those things were always there, right? They're always there. Just he looked mature. He looked physically filled out. He looked a step above. And the normal maturation you usually see from juniors to senior year. Like you saw that type of growth from a Kenny Minchie before the injuries kind of, took over the season, unfortunately. But he's a player for me, Brian. I mean, you mentioned the guys that were on the board with Dante, right? But even some of the names that have popped up since the Dante Moore fiasco ended, the Austin Novosads of the world and some others that we've kind of let people know from behind the scenes, I think that this was the best case scenario. I really do, because even Austin Novosad was a kid that apparently you would have had to worry about until the last seconds. I
want to say something else too. I'm going to interrupt you because you say things that I tell you because you don't want to just say it. It looks like sour grapes. But Ryan, the minute Notre Dame started looking at you said, I just don't see it with that kid.
Yeah.
Like I liked him more than you did. I think we both preferred Kenny Minchie, but at the time, Kenny Minchie wasn't really a guy that was going to flip at the time,
Right.
And I said, look, I like him. He's got some tools. But you didn't. You were not on that train. You were just like, he's okay, because you look at him and say he's not a guy that you look at and say you put him in the Tommy Rees offense, he's going to be a dude. He's going to make those plays for you. I think you're comparing. He's Jack Cohn, right? He's a good football player.
He's
fine. A solid player.
Which is
fine. But he's not going to put it on. You can win a championship with Jack Cohn, but it's only because he manages a really good group around him. And
Right.
I'm a Jack Cohn guy,
Mhm.
but I'd rather have a more impactful guy. I'd rather have Jimmy
Yes,
Clausen.
for
I'd rather
sure.
have Brady Quinn. I'd rather have Malik Zaire. I'd rather have Everett Golson. I'd rather have Deshaun Kaiser. I'd rather have Kenny Minchie.
Mhm.
And that's the key. So I just wanted to give you credit on that one. Even when
Yep.
it looked like Notre Dame was going to get Austin Novosad, you were like, that's fine. But
I
you always
I
felt that
was
way.
I was on board with it from the rankings perspective, right? I was like, okay, he's a Texas kid. He's got the rankings. You got CJ Carr coming in. Like, I can talk myself into Austin Novosad, but he never sold me on it. You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of the difference. Like, I can talk myself into it. Kenny Minchie, I didn't really have to talk myself into it, Ryan. I mean, we were scouring late before it became a thing. Kenny Minchie became a thing again. And we're like, man, what about this quarterback? Maybe this quarterback could be a guy Notre Dame could go after. And we were just watching film and film and film. And then you hear some of the names that might be guys that Notre Dame will take a look at. And you're just like, that doesn't move the needle at all for me, man. Some of these kids, right? And then all of a sudden, the stars align and Kenny Minchie becomes a conversation again. And look, man, at the end of the day, guys, if you're asking me which would I rather have, Dante Moore and question a 2024 quarterback right now, you don't know who that guy
Right.
is, or Kenny Minchie and CJ Carr, taking the latter all
100%.
day long. Like, there's no doubt, because we talk about the margin for error so much. You know, when your margin for error gets a lot larger, when you have guys as talented as Kenny Minchie and CJ Carr coming into a room with hopefully a healthy Tyler Buckner and then a grad transfer quarterback, that's where you're talking about now that you're having opportunities that even if a guy doesn't pan out, you're not stuck, right? If a Tyler Buckner gets hurt, you're not stuck anymore. You have bodies, you have opportunities, you have options. Notre Dame has the options now in 2023 and 2024. And that starts with Kenny Minchie, man, a guy that, and let's call it what it is, right? I'm gonna put this out there, nicely, right? There were some quarterbacks that were driven by other factors. And Kenny Minchie, I don't believe is one of those guys, because I'm sure that there were some other schools that tried to get in on that one. I'm sure of it, right? But he's a kid that isn't driven like that. He isn't wired like that. He fits what Notre Dame's looking for. He's a very talented player in general. And I think that it's just going to be a seamless transition, man. Is he going to be the guy at Notre Dame? I have no idea. But what I do know is that he gives you a lot more talent in the quarterback room the minute he steps on campus. You're adding to the talent you have already in the room as of now. So I think that it's a tremendous gift for Notre Dame, about as good as it possibly could have ended up after the Dante Moore thing, right? If it's Dante Moore, then maybe we're talking about an A-plus class, right? But you're still getting an A-range class with a Kenny Minchie, because he is a top 10 quarterback in this class to me. He is a top 100 player. And his senior year, if he would have continued that trajectory,
Yeah.
I think the rankings right now would be like, oh, that's
That's
that
why
type of
he's
dude.
not going to move up in my rankings. He's going to stay
Yeah.
around that 75 to 85 range, most likely, because he didn't play his entire senior year. But he started off hot, and he was hot coming out of the gate. I would have liked to see him, but you can't ignore that he did have the shoulder injury, and he's fine. My understanding is he's going to play in the All-Star game, which I think speaks volumes about how it wasn't. It was, my understanding, it was just a nagging thing that wouldn't go away, and every time he tried to push it, it just would kind of have a little bit of a setback. So it wasn't like a structural thing like Tyler with a torn ACL or the broken clavicle. It wasn't that type of thing. So I don't know if the class as overall would have been an A+ with Dante. I think it would have been an A, because I think Dante does have a higher ceiling. But I was not blown away by Dante's film this season. I think Dante was very distracted this year, if I'm going to be honest with you, and I kind of feel bad for him.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those things where when you look at how it all went down, here's the danger, Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
You're running a situation where you ended up without Dante or CJ Carr if you would have pushed to keep Dante, and if you were not willing to take CJ because of Dante. And that was part of the risk that Notre Dame had, is if you insist on pushing for Dante, you're going to have a hard time getting CJ because of the relationship there and some of the things that were going on with Dante that would have made it very unattractive for CJ to want to come to Notre Dame at the time.
Well,
and some of the asks that he had. And so, but my point is, Notre Dame could have, I'm just telling y'all right now, I still believe that Notre Dame could have landed Dante Moore as a public commitment at some point in time in the fall. I truly believe that. But what I'm not going to tell you is that he would have signed with Notre Dame. And I think we saw that.
Yeah.
I think we saw that. And so then you're in a situation where you end up without Dante or CJ Carr, and that's when Notre Dame would have been really screwed. So I am very pleased with how the quarterback thing played out. It wasn't the way what could have happened. Like, I didn't meet my wife the way I grew up thinking I was going to meet a woman and fall in love and do all that. But hey, I'm happy it worked out the way that it did.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Yep. And that's how I feel about the quarterback class, right? It's like, the process wasn't necessarily pretty, and it was stressful at times. But at the end of the day, they got a kid in Kenny Minchie that I feel is, if he ends up winning the starting quarterback job at any point in time, Notre Dame's going to finally have a quarterback behind center that you say, I can win. I feel comfortable going against anybody now and feeling like we can compete at quarterback is how I would look at it. And that's the key for this class. And so we're spending a little bit more time on quarterback than other positions because it was so important in this class. Yeah. So important. And especially because it looked for a time like they weren't going to get anybody. I mean, Ryan, we were sitting here in kind of early October thinking, I don't think they're going to get a quarterback in this class, or at least not a guy that is going to be it was just going to be a body.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the names that in the film that we were looking at were just like, we would text you like, oh my gosh, like, this is just, I can't believe this might be a kid that Notre Dame might have to take in this class. It was getting bad.
There was a lot of kids that you thought would be solid football players at the University of Indiana, not so much Notre Dame. Like, that's kind of the guys we were looking at, and it was
that's
trouble
a great
for
way
a
of
while.
putting it. Yeah. Okay player at Northwestern, but not a guy that Notre Dame should be looking at. Absolutely
exactly
right.
I mean, and I mean, thankful with hindsight that the Dante Moore thing did end when it ended, right? Because they had an opportunity to rebound. I mean, could you imagine, Brian, if he took it up into signing day and then flipped a couple of days beforehand? Like, then you're screwed at that point. So I think everything worked out quarterback wise pretty much as well as it could have, man. Because I'm very happy with the future of Kenny Minchie at Notre Dame. We'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. Let's move on to running back, Ryan. And so here is the interesting thing that I had to do with this running back grade. I gave it an A-. I think Jeremiah Love is one of the 5 best running backs in the class. So just on Jeremiah Love alone, it should have been an A. I only felt Notre Dame needed 1 running back in this class. And so for me, it's an A. I think Jeremiah Love fits this offense very well. It's an A. But here's why I dropped it to an A-, because they wanted 2 and they tried to get 2 and they didn't.
Right.
So I think you can make a case that it should be an A, but but from a need standpoint. So I graded this one a little weird, Ryan, because of the fact that they did want a second running back. Now, they didn't force a second running back. So when they knew Jalen Lamar was potentially leaving, they didn't like, okay, shoot, let's scramble around and find a second running back. So I think you could argue with me that I shouldn't have graded it that way, and that's fair. But that's why I went with A- as opposed to A, because of that factor. But just looking at it from a depth chart standpoint, I think they met their need. They got one of the best kids in the class. And one of the big picture needs that they had in this class, Ryan, was adding more impact home run talent. And Jeremiah Love certainly adds that. This is one of the best home run hitters in the country as far as a running back. There are running backs ahead of him, like a Richard Young, that are good players. Cedric Baxter. They may be better all backs, but they're not better home run hitters than him. And his playoff performance, to me also, I had him in, my grade for him kind of during the regular season was, he jumped up in my ranking, right? I mean, there's no doubt. But the issue I had was, man, I just wish they'd use him more. And that was my knock. It's like when he plays and they actually use him, man, he's really good. But they just didn't use him enough. And then that changed in the postseason, Ryan. And that's kind of one of those things that's going to bump it up. And I want to share this with fans because this is phenomenal. I love money players. In 8 career playoff games, Jeremiah Love rushed for 1,022 yards and 17 touchdowns on just 92 carries, 11.1 per carry. Keep in mind also that as a junior in one of the playoff games, he had like 1 carry. It was a game they won by like 50. So that counted as one of the 8 games that he played in. Is a game he had 1 carry. I think the first round playoff game this year was also like a 40-point win. He had like 3 carries. So keep that in mind when you look at his 1,000 yards in 8 games in the playoffs.
Wasn't that one game? Didn't he have a one carry for like 20 yards and a
Yes,
touchdown or
that
something
was
like
last
that?
year. It was the same team both years in the first round. It was where Kyron Williams went to high school. Vianney.
Vianney, right?
Yeah.
Vianney, whatever you
And so
pronounce it.
he had
Yeah.
like in 2 years in the playoffs, he had like 3 or 4 carries against them in the first round of playoffs both years. Keep that in mind when you're looking at his, like, you could argue his 2 best career games were this year's state title game where he had over 200 yards rushing and over 100 yards receiving, and last year's semifinal game where he had over 200 yards, I believe over 200 yards rushing as well. When the games are the biggest, Jeremiah Love was at his best, and that speaks volumes because at Notre Dame, you have to have that kind of player.
Right.
Because you need that guy that when the bright lights are bright says, okay, we got Alabama coming up. Get me the rock, baby. I want the ball, and I'm going to be at my best. That's what you win championships with, is that kind of, not just the talent, Ryan, but it's the mindset. And we saw this from Jaden Greathouse last year too. In the playoffs, Jaden Greathouse took his game to a whole different level. And it's those kind of players that you need. And so you can't dismiss the importance of that when we're breaking down how just impactful Lanny Jeremiah Love was. Talent checks out off, outstanding, top of the board guy. But that right there is one of those deciding factors that really makes you feel good about why this is an A- class, is because you landed guys that have that dog mentality. And we talk about they need dudes, whether you want to call them dudes or dogs or money players or whatever your expression is, they need more of them. And Jeremiah Love is that.
Agree. Well, and that state title game was against Lee Summit North, who is a very good football team, and they have a 5-star defensive end in 2024 in Williams and Winery. So, I mean, they got dudes on that side of the ball. I mean, he played a playoff game against AJ Epinez's brothers, one of the top 2025 kids at defensive end as well. So, I mean, he's playing against good competition on his level. And when he got the football, he did something with it, man. You know who else, Brian, would say that, yes, he needed the ball more? It would be Jeremiah Love would be a guy that said he needs the ball more. He would tell you straight up in interviews, man, like, I need the ball more. Like, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree with you. So he's a fantastic player. He is. And I think that when you looked at where they were originally, right, you had a Cedric Irvin Jr., and then it looked like, do you get a Jaden Lamar to kind of bolster that because it's not maybe the talent level that you need at the position, but then you get 2 good football players, right? And then you got to a situation where now you have Jaden Lamar. Jaden Lamar is a nice complimentary back, no doubt, but let's get a guy that could be potentially the 3-down guy, the lead back type. So then you go after Jeremiah Love, and even with losing a Jaden Lamar late in the process, I think that you look now and if the situation was reversed a little bit, if you get a Jeremiah Love early in the process, maybe you just stop with the second running back push, right? It's just the fact that you got the complimentary running back first, and then you were like, but I still need more. You know what I mean? So I think that it would have maybe changed the mindset slightly if you would have got Jeremiah Love first. Like maybe Chad and the staff would just be like, you know what? Like, we don't really need a second back. Like let's use our resources on a different type of position, right? Like maybe we can do something different here. Because we know that Chad and the staff they have pretty good foresight with a lot of things, right? Like they get their second options and their next plan of attack type of thing pretty early on in the process. So maybe that changes a little bit, but regardless, if we're talking just about pure talent and how he fits in the system, Jeremiah Love's a dude, man. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. They have him listed at 6'1", 195. Think he could steadily be 215 plus pounds and not lose an ounce of athleticism, lateral quickness, home run speed. He's got some physicality to him. When he starts to really work on kind of pad level stuff and starts to fill out his frame, and he really adds more of a power element to his game than he has right now, then he's an all-around back because he can catch the football, he can run outside, he can break tackles, he can do all those things in the open field. But when he adds power, then we're talking about I think there's a legit conversation, Brian. I don't know if you agree with this, but because I agree with you, there's a couple nice backs at the top. You mentioned Cedric Baxter, you mentioned Richard Young, Ruben Owens is a really talented football player. There's no doubt. But if Jeremiah Love hits his ceiling, I think that you can argue that Notre Dame may have gotten the best back in this class if that happens, right? He has that type of upside, in my opinion.
For this offense,
yes.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah. Like at Georgia would be better off with a Richard Young type, right? So that's why fit is so important, right? Like Richard Young's a heck of a back. I believe he was my number 1 back last year. He was my number 1 back. I had him as the number 15 overall player in the country. I had Cedric Baxter right behind him. I like Cedric Baxter a lot.
It's a big
but
boy,
I
man.
think Reuben Owens is a really good back. I think Reuben Owens at Alabama fits them great if they do what they did in the past. I think the concern there is you're going to Alabama. Are they going to try to do with you what they've done at running back last year with Jahmyr Gibbs? I don't think he fits that offense that great. I have a feeling Nick Saban's going to want to go back to being able to run the football. I just, when you look at the two running backs they land, Justin Haynes still signed with Alabama yesterday.
Yes,
correct?
he did. Yep.
Those are two backs that you're putting in a Bama offense from 5 years ago, not what they're doing right now. So I have a feeling he's going to demand a little bit more running of the football.
Yes.
And they fit that system well. They fit the Georgia system well. But for what Notre Dame does and what I think Notre Dame wants to be, yes, they're going to run duo, but also a team that runs zone, that runs the ball outside to get the ball. And here's the thing, too. Jeremiah Love's a very good blocker.
Yeah.
Very good blocker already. And so he's a legitimate every down back in Notre Dame. And I think what he showed me in the playoffs this year was he can be a 20-carry guy and be physical and grind out the tough yards as well.
Yeah.
And that's partly why he rushed for so many touchdowns. They weren't all home runs. There was a couple. He had one, I think it was a second-round playoff game. He had to make like 4 or 5 – he had to break like 4 or 5 tackles to score from like 5 yards out. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, and then he bent it, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep. And you're like, okay, that kid's showing me that he's not just a home run hitter. Because that's what he was when they first started getting on him, right? He just was kind of like a home run hitter. He's still learning the position. And, you know, and his ranking was built a lot on, you know, just a guy that – I had him number 73, for example, in my ranking from this summer. And I had him as the number – at the time, the number 4 running back in the country at the time. He was uncommitted at the time. And you look at it and say, boy, this kid got better. So, and then my number 5 back was, I don't know if you ever seen this kid, was a kid named Jeremiah Cobb that at the time was coming to Auburn. I don't know if he's still signed with Auburn, but it's not and here's the other thing too, Ryan, and this is why this matters too. This is not a great running back class. It's not. And if you didn't hit on one of the top guys, it's going to be a problem.
Top like 3, 4, 5.
Like 5, yeah.
Like
if you didn't get one of the top 5 or 6 guys, you were going to be in trouble. Because like I don't love Justice Haynes. I didn't have him in my top 100. He's a good back. Yeah. He's a nice number 2 back. But there was a big drop off between the top 4 or 5 and kind of everybody else. I only had 5 running backs in my top 100 over the summer. Now I haven't redone my top 100. There's some backs I still have to evaluate to see how they did as seniors, but they got one of the best, and that's important. Let's move to wide receiver, Ryan. Wide receiver class. I mean, look, it was also a kind of a weird, winding, twisting road to get to where they got to. But at the end of the day, this is a heck of a group. I mean, to me, this is one of the 2 to 3 best receiver hauls in the country. And I don't care what the recruiting rankings say. This is an A grade for me. I gave the receivers an A grade. And the only reason I didn't give it an A plus grade is because I think to earn an A plus, you have to have a truly elite player in your class. And I think that's the only thing missing from this receiver haul is just that elite Michael Floyd, Julio Jones, elite kind of top 25 player. And I don't think they got that guy as far as where they are now. They got some guys, however, that could become that. And I think that's another thing I like about this group. But here's what you got, Ryan. Numbers needs met. You needed 4. They wanted 5, but not like they wanted a second running back. They wanted 5 just because, like, hey, let's get greedy kind of thing. And their 5th guy in Dylan Edwards was kind of a hybrid player anyway. He wasn't like a pure receiver. He wasn't a pure running back. He was going to be a hybrid player. So I didn't ding the receiver grade the same way I did the running back grade in full transparency because I think they put more into getting a second back than they put into getting a 5th receiver. It was just kind of like, hey, let's keep loading up. You know what I mean? And so I think they met their need from a number standpoint. I think the talent is good. I graded 2 of these guys out as top 100 players. I grade Rico out as a top 150 player, and I grade Caleb Smith out as a top 250 player. So I think talent-wise, it was very good. And then the third part is the fit thing is important in twofold. One, Ryan, is they all fit the offense. Okay, we can see a clearly defined role for each of them in this offense. But the other part of fit is, do they fit together?
Sure.
And I think that's important. They can all play at least 2 positions, the X, the Z, and the Y. The W. They can all play to at least 2 positions. In Jaden Greathouse's case, I think he can play all 3 to a degree. I think Braylon James could play all 3. I think Rico could play 2. I think Caleb Smith could play 2. And so I think that's important that they can play together. You can get these 4 guys in a rotation easily if that's your top 4 receivers. And I think that's a very important part of this conversation when looking at them. And then you throw in Jeremiah Love, who brings the pass game emphasis. Your pass game got a huge influx of talent in this class. And at receiver specifically, it's hard to imagine it being a whole lot better, with the exception of it could have got better if you'd have landed like that elite top of the board guy.
Right.
Outside of that, it's hard to argue with what this group ended up being. And the other thing is, you went into Texas to do it, which is going to hopefully open up a pipeline in future years. And you held on to these guys. It really is a heck of a class, in my opinion.
Well, I think the fit together is the biggest thing for me, Brian, and I'm glad you hit on that so well. It is the fact that I think of like a team like Clemson, for instance, right? You have good players at receiver, but they're all the same kind of guy, right? Like you have Joseph Ngata and Bo Collins and Dakari Collins. They're all 6'3" plus skyscrapers that need to play in the boundary. Like that's what they need to do. That's the type of players they are. Notre Dame got players that have very different skill sets. And some people I'm sure will look at that and be like, well, are they too different? And I would say absolutely not. I wrote an article about this morning about how you got a guy like a Braylon James who's 6'3", 185 pounds, 4'4" something verified, 4'47" verified in the 40-yard dash. Like he can play in the boundary, he can play outside to the field, and he can do those types of things because vertically he can beat you, and he's flexible. He has all those traits. Jaden Greathouse, he's going to look different into the boundary than Braylon James is going to be, because Braylon James is going to stack you and get on top of you very quickly. But Jaden Greathouse, with the size and the back shoulder ability that he has, he can play that position. I think that he legitimately, and I think you said this as well, I think he can play all 3 spots, Jaden Greathouse. You could throw him in the slot. You can throw him to the field. I don't love him outside to the field a ton, but I think he can do that. But in the boundary, absolutely, with the size and physicality he has. Caleb Smith is a guy that doesn't get talked about a ton, because he was kind of a late guy into the class, and he's the lesser ranked guy as far as the big 4, but he's a guy that his skill set is one that you haven't had enough of at Notre Dame. Like you've needed that guy that can make plays in space, that can be a true slot type, that can work and manage the traffic in the middle of the field and just, work after the catch. Like you've needed that type of football player. And then, oh, by the way, you got top 150 caliber football player, Rico Flores, who is one of the most productive wide receivers in the country, playing at a very good high school in Folsom, California, against very good competition. And by the way, he can play all around. He can do some stuff inside and out as well. So I think that's the biggest thing for me, Brian, is because I agree with you. None of those guys are slam dunk elite players right now. No doubt. I agree 100%. But they all have varying skill sets that fit well together, and you got talent that now can be utilized in this offense so comparably well to one another, right? Like they can work off of one another, and you can give so many different looks. So I'm looking and I'm like, who ends up being the best receiver in this class? And we've talked about this, right? Depending on who you ask, some people would say Jaden Greathouse. Some people would say Braylon James. Some people would say Caleb Smith. Some people would say Rico Flores. And that's why it is a complete and very good haul at wide receiver, because you have 4 good football players at the end of the day. And if they develop properly and they're used together well, that could be your wide receiver group for the future right there. That's the group where you say there's interchangeableness to a degree, there's varying skill sets, and that's the type of wide receiver group that we need to be a championship level team. Guys that can work together well and can make plays all over the field.
I think too, when you look at it, like as I look individually, Ryan, I just, you mentioned Caleb Smith. They needed an after the catch guy. We were begging for that last year. They needed an after catch guy, and he is that. But he's not just that. He's a guy that can run routes. He's a really nice route runner. Rico Flores, really precise route runner. One of the best just pure route runners in the class. You look at Jaden Greathouse. He's that volume guy, that volume pass catcher, that guy that can go out there in a game where you just need a guy to go out there and catch 10 balls because they're just the way that it is, and catching traffic and outplay people with the ball and use his strength and go out there. And that's why my comp for him was Juju Smith-Schuster, as far as like kind of the role I see him being, that volume guy. Mm-hmm. Even though he's not a burner and a home run hitter speed-wise, he can hit home runs. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And then you've got Braylon James, who is probably the most raw guy of the group, but the tools are outstanding. And so like if you were to grade the four receivers just on current grade, Braylon James might be third. But when you add the upside grade into it and the athletic traits, he's number one in my view. And I know you'd go with Greathouse, but it's a good argument to have because they're both really good players. And so I love the individual talent of these players, and they add things that Notre Dame needs more of. Who was the receiver that you looked at this year and said, boy, that guy is just physically, you can't guard him? None of them. Even Tobias is not that way. Tobias is long and fast, and he's a great talent. Dion could be that guy. I think Dion could eventually be that guy, but he wasn't this year. They need more of that. They need more of that guy that just physically you're just going to have a hard time guarding even when he's covered. He's not as big as Chase Claypool, but a very similar role to what Chase Claypool had for Notre Dame in 2019, which is like, dude, he's covered. Just throw it up and give him a chance. And he can, even though he's only 6'1.5", 6'2", he plays a lot bigger than that. But he also is a good route runner. So just I love this group of guys. It's a really good, it's a really talented group, and a group that I think Jaden Greathouse can help you right away. I guess that's the final need they had. You needed guys that can come in and play right away. I think Jaden for sure can come in and play right away. I don't be shocked if Rico Flores is able to come in and play right away either. His feel for the game is outstanding. Like he is a smart football player. He's a better athlete than some people give him credit for. He's not a burner. He's a good athlete, but he's a guy that knows how to play. He's smart. He's really good pass catcher. Like he's just great hands, catches the ball away from his body, great concentration and focus. Smart, plays from kind of a pro style type of high school offense. So I think there'd be a natural transition to what he's not coming from a Texas air raid high school where he runs 3 routes. Rico runs a lot of routes in high school, Ryan. And so he's a kid that I can see play right away. I think Caleb Smith could potentially find a role early on if you needed him to. And then Braylon James needs the most technical work, but a smart coach is going to say, I got to find a way to use that speed, right?
Yes.
Like, okay, I know he only knows how to run 3 routes. Okay, then put him in there and run those 3 routes and throw him a deep ball or 2. I think all these kids have to different abilities and different volume, can be kids that can come in right away. Now, all of them won't, most likely, but they all can, and that's what this staff also needed. That's the final piece to what gave me an A grade is if they got 4 incredibly talented players on the same level of these guys, but none of them were all projects, I would probably ding this class a little bit, because the need was you need at least 1 or 2 guys can come and play right now. Even with the transfer Caleb Smith coming in, you still need 1 or 2 guys that can come in and help you as freshmen. And I think this class got that. For sure got that.
And you know what isn't as quantifiable, but I think is really important too, Brian, is that I think that group, that 4-man group, brings a lot of swagger to the game too, right? They bring a lot of confidence. It's something where when you are covered and you need to make a play, you need that confidence to know that you can still make a play, right? And I think that Jaden Greathouse is a kid that the moment he steps on campus, right or wrong, is going to think that he's the best receiver in the room. And you need that, man. You need it. Braylon James is going to think that he is the most talented dude in that room and that no one can guard him. He's going to think that. Rico Flores is a very confident kid, coming back from, I know it wasn't a serious injury, obviously, right? So those are 3 kids that are all enrolling early, by the way, that are going to have an opportunity to fight for early playing time, because not only are they all talented in their own unique ways, but it's not going to be too big for them, right? Because we talk about it. Why do you want to go into Texas outside of getting great talents, right? Because those guys live for this stuff, man. You think Jaden Greathouse, after playing for Austin Westlake, is going to come to Notre Dame and be like starstruck? Heck no, man. He's going to come in and be like, I'm the dude here, man. Like, what are you talking about? Rico Flores played at Folsom High School. He's playing De La Salle and all those cats every week. Like, he's not afraid of competition. Are you crazy? Those guys have been at 2 of the better schools in the country. I mean, Braylon James has been playing against guys like Jaden Greathouse on a week-to-week basis. Like, they're not afraid of competition. They're going to come ready to play. Caleb Smith, who's the underrated guy of the group, is a Texas kid as well. So those guys are not afraid of competition. They're going to come in and they're going to compete. How will it end up year 1? No idea. But all I know is it's not going to be like that because they were gun shy or they were starstruck and that they just fell to the backgrounds, right? They're not going to be guys that the first year in camp, you're going to be like, oh, they're just kind of meandering to the back of the line in every drill, right? Like Jaden Grass going to be jumping up there, man, to be like, I'm a dude right now. Like, let's do this, right? Like that's what sold me on a guy like him. But I think that can't be. Look, it's not quantifiable in the sense that you're talking about what their grade is now, what their upside grade is, and that's how rankings should be made. But I look at it and I say, but also I think a big thing, especially at the wide receiver position, is you got to think you're a dude, man. You got to be ready to compete. And I think that you got dudes in this class that come from great programs, come from great regions of football, great states, and they'll be ready to come up to South Bend, Indiana and compete. And I think that's all you need, man. That's all you want in this type of situation.
Tight end class, Ryan, I thought was a good haul. And there's a couple ways I look at it. Obviously, I gave it a B+, just because, to me, the talent level wasn't top of the board.
Mm-hmm.
I think Cooper Flanagan is a good football player. He's a top 200 caliber guy, 2 to 250 caliber guy. That kind of is the grade is down. I gave it a B+. The reason I say is so it's not necessarily a B+ from a talent standpoint. I think he's a good football player that's got some projection to get better once he actually gets more time in a passing offense. But he's not a Michael Mayer. He's not an Eli Raritan, in my opinion, type of high-level player. But here's why I do grade it out well. And B+ is a very good grade, by the way. Not just that they only needed one tight end, but they needed a specific type of tight end. And the type of tight end they needed was a traditional guy that can line up and play attached to the line of scrimmage and be a blocker and be a big boy and play traditional tight end football. And he does that.
Yes.
He absolutely does that. And so that's what brought the grade back up to me. Because, a B is top 15. I think Cooper Flanagan is a top 10 to 15 type of talent in this tight end class. Just looking at them, just individual players. Mm-hmm. But what got it to B+ instead of just B is the specific need that Notre Dame had. He fits perfectly. Right. You could say like Deuce Robinson's the best tight end in the country. And I'd have taken Deuce Robinson in a heartbeat. But Deuce Robinson kind of does exactly what you already have on the roster in Eli Raritan and Holden Stace and guys like that, and what you already have in 2024. They needed a different type of tight end in this class, and Cooper Flanagan brings that. And that's why B+ was the grade that I gave him.
I mean, I think Cooper's got such a high floor too, right? Which is needed at this position, especially because he's, like you said, Brian, like he's another kid that comes from a great program at De La Salle, and he's been asked, if there's anything he's been asked to do, it's to run block, right? Like he knows the technical aspects of it. He's a physical kid, 6'5 plus. He's got long arms. He's 240 plus pounds already. I mean, he's going to be a kid that when he gets here in June, he's going to be 250 plus pounds ready to work and get with Matt Bayless and get stronger and get bigger. And I think that he's going to be able to compete from a run blocking perspective early on. I think, and I agree with your assessment. It's funny. I was actually working through what the grades would be for myself before I looked at your articles. And then I saw you had a B+. I was like, that's exactly what I would have said for tight end. Like I had no quarrel because I agree. He's not an elite level talent. Could he be a Troy Nicholas level pass catcher at some point? Like I wouldn't put that out of the question, right? Like, I think he's got that up because he's a linear football player, right? He's linear. He's got great length. Could he be that type of dude? For sure. I think he can be productive in the passing game in the right role, but the stay power, the floor early on is because my guy gets down and dirty in the run game, man. That's what he does. And that's what you need. And I would not be shocked. And I've said this multiple times in the last few weeks, would not be shocked if Cooper Flanagan plays a little bit as a freshman because he does that role very, very well, at least in 3 tight end looks, goal line stuff. Why would you not get a kid like that in the game that if he's able to match it physically, obviously has a lot of experience run blocking. So I think that he has the opportunity to compete for reps early because he does that role that he plays potentially in Notre Dame very, very well early on.
That's important, Ryan. I think that adds to it. There's no doubt is you don't necessarily have a lot of that in this offense. And one of the guys that I didn't think Eli Raritan was going to be a guy that early on could play attached and block, and he did. He put on more weight than I thought. He was really good there. I sometimes wonder if maybe some of that weight led to the knee injury. You know what I mean? Potentially, it's just me talking. It's no medical expert, just me wondering things that pop in my head sometimes. Yep. But he's not going to probably be ready to start the season. And then you got Mitchell Evans, who's a good blocker, but not a great blocker. He kind of plays that role just because of his size. Mm-hmm. This is a kid that can come in and take that role. as a freshman. I really think that. And I'd rather he not. I kind of like tight end, unless you're a Michael Mayer, is one of those, to me, I like 5-year positions. I wish Brock Wright would have got a 5th year, for example. Like, I could you imagine Brock Wright and Michael Mayer last year as a 1-2 punch of tight end?
Brock Wright's doing a good job as a tight end for
Yeah.
Detroit right now,
Yeah.
man. His receiving stats in NFL right now are much better than they were in college, which is wild.
Yeah.
Absolutely wild. But yeah.
Yep. So, I mean, to me, I would have loved to have seen that but he had to play as a freshman. You know what I mean? So that's going to be a key for this one.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it really is, man. I mean, when you look at the tight end position, just kind of looking through what the emphasis on him early on is going to be, I agree completely, because he's a player for me that's, I mean, hey, I don't know if anybody's seen De La Salle extensively, but in that triple option offense, he is going to block to the utmost and consistently. And when you're a red zone type of player, when you're a goal line type of player, I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if he's also a kid that works off of play action a little bit, and maybe he's a weapon in the red zone at times. So he's got the size, he's got the physicality. I really like how Cooper Flanagan fits into this offense potentially, because if Eli Raritan does get back at some point in the fall, and then you're matching the skill sets, they're all different, which again, I talked about this in the wide receiver portion of this podcast, but Eli Raritan's skill set is a lot different than Holden Stace's skill set. It's a lot different than Kevin Bauman's skill set. It's a lot different than Mitchell Evans' skill set. And it's a lot different from Cooper Flanagan's skill set. So adding those skill sets all together, I think, again, this is one of those positions like wide receiver where I want different types in a tight end room, man. Like, I don't want them to all look the same. I don't want them to all play the same. I want guys that can fill specific roles, especially in an offense under Tommy Rees that has done a lot of 12 personnel, has done some 13 personnel. Like, he likes to get multiple tight ends on the field a ton. Could it change next year? It's always possible, but I think the core of what Tommy Rees wants to do, I think that he does want to play some 12 personnel and be able to use multiple tight ends. So I think the more specific skill sets you get in that offense, the more that you can do potentially.
Let's move on to the offensive line, Ryan. And this is a grade that I'm curious what was your grade for the offensive line? I gave him an A-. What was your grade? I
was also going to give him an A-. I agree with you because I think you said it perfectly. Because I don't think we differ on this opinion. I don't because my opinion on Charles Jagusah has changed a lot, obviously, right? Like, I was like, he could play right tackle, maybe dominant guard. Now I'm like, that kid's a tackle. Like, I have no doubt about it. He could play guard if you need him to, absolutely, and be dominant in there. But he can play left. I think he can play right. The one person that I'm interested in is Sullivan Absher, because when you look at his body type and just his play style and lack of reps in pass protection, I look at that kid and I say, maybe a right tackle, but like, I think he's a guard long-term, and that's not a bad thing. It's not. Yeah. Because I think he could be a really good player inside. Like, there's no doubt about it. But if he is ultimately a guard on the next level, you don't have a high margin for error for a second offensive tackle in that class, because then Sam Pendleton is definitely a guard. Like, he's not going to play tackle, right? Could he move out in a pinch to get you out of a football game? It's possible because he's a really smart football player, but he's not going to be a tackle full time. Joe Otting is going to be a pure interior player. Chris Tarek is going to be a pure interior player. So if Sullivan Absher cannot be an offensive tackle in your system, then you only got one true offensive tackle in this class, which I think that's where you kind of get hung up a little bit. I like the talents, I like the potential, but I really just am struggling if Sullivan Absher is not that guy at tackle, then you're a little hamstrung for offensive tackles moving forward.
Would you have leaned more towards A or B+? Because I would have leaned more towards B+. And it's for the reason that you just mentioned. I like this offensive line class at all. The reason a lot, excuse me. The reason I went A- is because when I look at the other offensive line hauls, it's one of the 5 best in the country. It fits the criteria. I just have, you know what it comes down to? It really comes down to this: Sullivan Absher. That's what it comes down to. The fact that we just haven't seen him do a big part of the game a whole lot is the thing that gives me I love the things that I see. I love his size, I love his length. I love his demeanor. He's physical. He's punishing. He shows me athletic skills on Tim. I actually like his athleticism a little bit more than you do, I believe, from our conversations. But how can I say definitively that dude's an offensive tackle in college when I've really never seen him pass block, hardly at all. And so I think that's my hang up is I like the talent of this group. Like I like Sam Pendleton, but Pendleton's a floor guy, not necessarily a ceiling guy. Christopher Tarrick's a floor guy, not a ceiling guy. Agreed. Now, that factored into why I didn't give it an A, but in another sense, it also kind of bumped it up a little bit in some ways too, when I look at it from a depth standpoint. So like, I didn't love the impact talent beyond Jagasaw and Absher. Mm-hmm. Joe Otting, I love his talent, but he's such a low floor guy because of the body, the need to build the body up. And so when I look at this class, but what I also see is I see some higher floors. Like Chris Tarrick is going to be at the very least a depth guy at Notre Dame.
Yes.
He was my number 5 guy. Sam Pendleton at the very least is going to be to me, a very good depth piece or a 2-year, 4th and 5th year senior starter guy, right? Like that's how I see him. Where in past years, your 4th and 5th guys were guys that just couldn't play or were guys I wasn't really sure of. This year, your 3, 4, and 5 are good, solid football players. So I love the depth of it, and that bumped it up a little bit. And then what dragged it back down a little bit is when I look at the impact talent. Yep. And so, and people have asked, I have not seen the Shrine Bowl a whole lot, but that also doesn't matter a ton to me as far as moving the needle on the grade, just because it's something he had to kind of just prepare for that game. But I think the talent is there. It's just the thing that gives me pause as to see it. And so perhaps my grade changes when I come out with my top 100 and after the All-Star games, because I will eventually watch the Shrine Bowl and try to find some practice of the film or film of the practice during that period of time. But I think that's really what comes to me, guys, is just being able to look at it from the standpoint of saying, I'm just really unsure of this group and its true high-level talent.
Right.
So that's kind of where I kind of find that happy medium of A- and even to a bit degree to the B+, because I think Jagasaw can play left tackle for sure. But here's the thing, though. I don't know if that's where I would prefer him. You know what I mean? And so those are the things that all factored into A- and not A. Right. And are some of the red flags, but I like the talent. And here's the thing. If Absher hits and if Otting can fill out and keep his athleticism, that changes the needle. That changes the standard for me. That raises it up. Because if those two things happen, then all of a sudden the couple concerns I have are down. And you feel fired up about it.
You mentioned this earlier, Brian, that you want to do obviously a 2-year recruiting review. You know what else would change it a little bit if I was certain that Emil Wagner could be a dude at Notre Dame. If he could be a dude, then I look at this and say, you know what? If Absher ends up being a guard, I didn't miss because I still got a kid that's going to be a 4-year, a guy that could play 4 more years and be a part of that group potentially, right? But if he can't fill out appropriately and play at Notre Dame, from a starting perspective, then you're looking at a 2-year class of getting 1 true offensive tackle, right? I mean, that's kind of what you're looking at, right? So for sure, if an Absher can't stick a tackle. So I just think that there's not a massive margin for error here, right? Like you need Absher to be able to play tackle. If he can, then this is a moot point, right? If both those guys can play tackle, then you're like, cool, man. Now you're working with Billy Schrouth and Rocco Spindler from previous years, working in with guys like Sullivan Absher and Sam Pendleton. And now you got options, which is always what you want on the offensive line, like always. So I trust Harry Heastand's evaluation. If he tells me that Sullivan Absher could definitely be a tackle at the next level, I'm going to give it an opportunity to play out. There's no doubt about it. It's just from a grading perspective, from what I've seen from Absher, I think he could be a damn good guard, man. Like I think that he could be a dominant player inside potentially. I really do. I mean, Brian, I remember when we first watched him together, right? I mean, I'm still very high on him. I think that he plays with great pad level, super physical, violent upon contact, like and good foot quickness for his size. Like everything's good there, man. It's just, can he play in reverse, right? Can he play in a true pass set?
And that's what we talked about with him yesterday. And he understands that. And he has a plan for that. That's why, I flat out asked Sullivan about that.
Yep.
And he talked about, like, I have a guy that I'm working with right? I have someone that's trained that, I had to do that getting ready for the thing, and I'll get better at it. And look, Harry Heastand's not taking that kid and pushing as hard as he did for him if he doesn't see the tools too. It's just, you got to see it.
Yep.
Let's move over to the defense, Ryan. And this class was interesting because, unfortunately, this is going to be the class that people look at as the what if group, much, much more so than the offense, because people in their heads are just not going to be able to get three names out of their heads: Keon Keeley, Jason Moore, and Peyton Bowen. And that's understandable. We're not going to focus on them during this show. So what I want you all to try to do the best you can is for us to talk about what this class is for the purposes of the rest of this show. So in the chat, and we're having this conversation, let's talk about what is, not what, but what if. Okay, so we're going to focus on what is. What is this is an outstanding group of players. This is an outstanding haul. I gave it a B+ because I don't think it's quite a top 5 group, but I think it's without question a top 10 group, in my opinion, from a defensive staff or defensive haul standpoint. The reason it didn't quite get into that A- territory, Ryan, is because I felt that they needed a little bit more certainty up front.
Yeah.
And I would have liked to have had an edge rusher. Now, so that you all understand the purposes of this, talking to some different sources, basically what happened in the last 24 hours with the Peyton Bowen situation has solidified where Brandon Hillman's going to start his career, and that's going to be safety. So when we're talking about this class, we're talking about Notre Dame getting Brandon Hillman and playing him at safety, which is always a possibility.
Yep.
So keep that in mind. I like the numbers at safety. I think that that's a position you could have maybe had a little bit more impact talent. I think you could argue that you need an edge. I think the floor to ceiling gap in the 4 defensive linemen are the things that have me having it down as a B+ as opposed to an A- or an A. That's the reason I gave them. I think you could argue for A-. I'm not quite ready to go there for those. Those are the reasons really I look at it and say that's where this group is for me.
And I'm not going to push too much on the grade, honestly, Brian, because I completely understand your opinion on it, right? I mean, because there's a lot of peaks and valleys to this class, right? There's a lot of variance. There's a lot of potential. And I mean, you mentioned this before, though, on this podcast, I believe, that if you can guarantee that all Notre Dame's players on the defensive side of the football hits, then this is a top 5 class. Like, there's no doubt about it, right? But it's just up front, especially, there's just too much variance to how good this group can be, right? It could be stellar, guys. And I'm writing an article right now about this, the fact that the defensive line, I believe, is the make it or break it group for this class in general, in my opinion. Like, I do think that, because it could be fantastic or it could just be meh, right? It could be depth at that point. It's got, tools, these guys that maybe when they're 4th or 5th year guys really add a lot to your game. Like more like Adiag Ogundiji, like that type of player, right?
Right. There's a lot of him in this class.
Yes.
That's a great example of what you're talking about, Ryan.
I think there is a lot of that in this class. And it gets you excited because as a football guy and as a former coach, I look at that and say, I would love to work with Armand Mukum. I would love to work with Boubacar Traore. I can get the best out of that guy. But the fact of the matter is that all those guys are not going to hit. It's never going to happen. And that's every school. It's not just a Notre Dame thing. There are 5-stars on every team every single year that do not hit, that don't become the guys that they are because for whatever reason, whether it's a mental thing, whether it's a coaching thing, whatever, they don't reach their potential. So not every player Notre Dame has is going to hit. The one thing I'll say about it, though, Brian, from a positive perspective is, yes, I think it's still a very good class. And one thing I'll say is, did Notre Dame get more athletic and longer at every level of the defense? No doubt, right? Like, the talent is easy to see. There's no question that Al Washington, Al Golden, Chris O'Leary, Mike Mickens, they're going to have some talents to work with. There's no doubt about that.
Let's start up front, Ryan, and look at the defensive line. Because I think that, for me, and I know for some people it's the safeties. We'll get to them because I think people are going to disagree with us when we talk about the safety group. But when I look at the defensive line class, Ryan, I gave the defensive line and the safeties a similar grade, and for different reasons. I gave them the same grade actually for different reasons, and I gave them a B. So I went with B because, again, what does B mean? in our grading system, because you have to understand what we mean by B when we say that a group got a B. It's an outstanding haul. It's a top 15 caliber group. I think you could argue for B plus if you're going to look at if you're going to focus more on the upside, you could give them an A minus. But here's some of the things that kind of dragged it down a little bit for me. It's not even the fact that they don't have an edge rusher, because again, I don't think that was needed. You didn't need Keon Keeley because, boy, we're desperate for a Viper. You needed Keon Keeley because you don't have anyone like him on your roster. That is a gap erasing type of player, right? And so that's why they also didn't lose their minds trying to replace him, because the main needs in this, they needed length, they needed power, they needed guys who could play inside. That's what this group staff needed, because as the season wore on, yeah, Josh Burnham moved to Viper. Yeah, Aiden Gobayer can play there. Junior Tuihalamaka started playing there more during the season. So the staff decided it's not a great Viper year, and there's nobody that we can get right now. I mean, sure, they'd love to have Keon Keeley, Damon Wilson, Caleb Herring. For the life of me right now, Shandavian Bradley. Those are guys that the staff liked a lot. They weren't getting those guys. Right. And there's a reason Ohio State didn't get Damon Wilson. So even if for some reason Notre Dame did land at Damon Wilson, guess what? He's flipping for an NIL deal at the end anyway, if you're to believe what is being reported by some Ohio State people, right? Mm-hmm. How true that is, I don't know. That's why I'm saying it's being reported by others. But would it shock you and fit in line with everything else we hear about kids from that region? No, not at all. So they met their needs with length. They added size. They added power. Those were all things that this staff needed, more than you needed a pure edge rusher. Mm-hmm. I want a pure edge rusher, however, every year. Right? Whether it's a need or not, I'm trying to land an edge rusher every year. So I am going to ding them a little bit for that, even though it wasn't necessarily need. I also think that I give the staff a lot of credit for finding these high upside guys like Boubacar Traore, like Armel Mukam, to a degree, Devin Houston. But at the same time, it's always risky when you're taking that, when your class is built around them, because the Adi Ogundeji class had Adi Ogundeji, who was a 215-pound defensive end whose upside I loved. I gave him a 4.5-star upside grade. However, he also had Khalid Kareem in that class, Julian Akwar in that class, and Dalen Hayes in that class. And Dalen and Khalid were both very high floor guys. And then Julian Akwara was a lot like Adi in that he was a lower floor because he was like 205 pounds when he signed Notre Dame. He was a low floor but very high ceiling guy. But you still had those two high floor guys built in. And I don't view Brennan Vernon as the kind of high floor guy that Khalid Kareem and Dalen Hayes were. He is also a little bit of boomer bust for me because of the injuries, because of the fact that you don't quite know where he's going to play. He's just not a sure thing. But again, like the others, Brennan has a very high ceiling. If he can stay healthy and develop, he's got a very high ceiling. But he's more of a 5 technique, power end, 3 technique, potentially even a nose guard if he keeps filling out in this defense nose guard. So I love that about him. But again, he's got as talented as he is, there's still parts of his game. His problem was his high school didn't use him correctly, in my opinion. They just kind of put him out there and said, go be a big dude. And he was. They didn't really turn him loose a lot. So the production doesn't equal the talent. That matters to me when I'm evaluating, when I'm talking about grades. Boubacar was a little banged up this year. He's still a projectable kid. Devin Houston's the most impactful kid they had at the high school level. He was the most productive they had the last 2 years. He's probably the highest floor guy that they have, and I like him a lot too. So there's a lot I like about this defensive line class, Ryan. But if we're talking about stacking it up against the best of the best, it just doesn't quite live up to, or doesn't quite meet that standard the way that the linebacker group does, the cornerback group does, the O-line group does, the receivers, the running backs, the quarterbacks. It just doesn't quite stack up based on what we know about the class. But I'll say this, if they can develop it, this class has a chance to surprise and far outplay its ranking. It's just, as you said, Ryan, when you have the lower floor guys, unless you catch a little bit of luck or you have a great developer, the reality is you're just going to be in situations where you're just not – the odds of them all panning out is just – it just doesn't happen that way. What happened with the 2016 class is rare. They literally all panned out to some degree. They literally all were NFL players. All 4 of them got drafted. That is such a rare thing. And part of it is because 2 of them had very high floors. And that's a big part of it.
Well, and I would say this too, Brian. I mean, from a ranking perspective, you can't rank this group that high. You can't do it because of that variance, right? You have to take the floor into competition because there's going to be some opportunity for those guys to play also. Like we didn't talk about that a ton, right? But there's going to be some opportunity inside at defensive tackle with Jason Admiral leaving and trying to find impact talent in there. There's going to be some opportunities at Viper if there's a guy that can play that position. Obviously, I don't think there is that guy in this class, but there's going to be opportunities to play. I mean, if you start toying with Riley Mills inside, then there's going to be an opportunity at big end for maybe one of these guys to get some playing time, right? So I think there's going to be opportunities. I don't think there's a ton of high floor guys. I agree 100% on you with you on that. I would say this from the positive perspective, obviously, and you hit on this already. I disagree with some people at times about what is missing with this defensive line at Notre Dame in general. Everyone always talks about weights. I don't think it's just weights, guys. I think it's length, right? I think it's the body types where you can add that weight sufficiently. Like, why does everyone keep talking about Justin Scott in 2024? It's because not only is he 300 pounds, he's also 6'5" and still put on a lot more weights. You got a ton of length in this class, man. I mean, you want to talk about drawing it up on the board? Like Boubacar Traore is what it looks like. He's 6'4" with an 80-inch wingspan. Like you want that type of dude. Armel Mukum is 6'4", almost the same exact size as Boubacar Traore, and probably right around the same type of arm length. Like he is vines for arms. Brennan Vernon is 6'5", now probably 280 plus pounds, and he's got really nice length for his position. And the great thing about Brendan Vernon, too, Brian, is although he's a big kid, he can still put on a substantial amount of weight, in my opinion. It's still a clean frame. Like, he's not fat, right? Like, he's just a good-looking frame. Like, he could be 6'5", 300 in a snap of a finger. Like, he can be that type of dude. So maybe that is your 3-tech. Maybe he is your penetrating nose type. Yes.
Would you argue that he went from a little overrated to very underrated during the course of the last year?
Yes.
Like, I never felt he was, and I said this at the time, he was not, in my opinion, a top 10 to 15 guy. Like rivals had him when they first had him. Yep. But now people don't even have him in their top 250. And I think that's absurd. Like, to me, he's a top 250, top 150-ish kind of guy because because of the combination of floor plus ceiling, body type, and all that kind of stuff. You look at his rankings, On3 has him at number 257. ESPN has him at number 111. Rivals has him at 60. And then 247 doesn't even have him in the top 247 guys. So one service has him as the number 7 defensive lineman in the country, and another has him number 40. It's a pretty big gap. To me, I kind of view him right now as closer to between ESPN and On3, 111 to 257. Is kind of where I'd have him, but closer to 111 than 257. But I'd say my range for him is in there. I think he's like around 145 to 165 for me. But some of the people I think have really underrated him quite a bit. Yes. Whereas early on he was ranked a little too high for me because at the time they thought he was going to Ohio State. So, that's why he was ranked that high, for being honest.
We talked about this yesterday a little bit on IB Nation Sports Talk. Someone actually put the question in the mailbag and was like, why is no one talking about Brendan Vernon? And I think a lot of it is he's been in the class forever. He's a Notre Dame commit, right? But then also he doesn't have a flashy game, right? Like he does a lot of the dirty work for his team. Like he two gaps a ton. He plays down. He works in the run game, plays the pursuit. Like he does a lot of the dirty work. And plus he hates media. He hates social media. Like, he doesn't give a flip about any of that stuff, which is surprising how well Brian, I don't know if you heard some of the interviews that he did on signing day. It was really good, man. I was like, oh, okay. He opened up to some reporters for once. It was fantastic. But, I mean, he is underrated tremendously, in my opinion. And I think, getting back to the original point is that, I mean, Brian, like, he could be 6'5", 300 pounds before – in the snap of a finger. Devin Houston could be 6'4.5", near 300 pounds, or at 300 pounds in a snap of a finger. Boubacar Traore and Armel Mukum both have size profiles where I say with their 80-inch wingspans, those guys can fill out and be 270 plus playing defensive end still. Like they could still be those types of dudes. So you got power, you got length. I think you did meet a tremendous need on the roster in the sense that you need to get longer up front. There's no doubt about that. You need that size profile. But to your point, you still can't rank them super high because there is so much question to the floor. There is. I mean, which one of these guys is for sure going to play year 1 and year 2? I don't know if the answer is 100%. Exactly.
Can you guarantee me that any of them can play big end?
Well,
You
I
can't.
asked that. I asked that with Devin Houston yesterday, Brian. I was like, the interesting part of this defensive line class is that I have a mind, like I have a idea of where each one of you guys will probably end up, but I don't know for sure. Like there's so much variance to it. And he talked about that, how each one of them have similar-ish skill sets, and they have, big bodies and long frames and all those types of things. So yeah, I mean, and he mentioned it. He said it's a possibility that maybe we're all interior guys down the line, and we're just rotating into two spots. I'm like, you're not wrong. Like you might all be interior guys down the line.
And
it's
that's
possible.
the concern.
So
that's the concern, Ryan. There's a chance that they could all fit. All four of them could fit best as three techniques and noses.
Yeah.
Now I think Armel Mookum's going to end up being an edge player. He's the one I'm most confident in being an edge player. So, but you can't play them as a foursome right now based on what we know.
No.
Together.
Somebody's going to be out of position
in the current defense, right?
Yep.
In the current defense, I just don't think that fits.
But I will say this, Brian, is if you hit, it's putting more pressure on 2024 from an edge perspective, right?
And last year's class.
Yes.
You need Burnham and Gobira to pan out.
But the positive is that what can change the grade down the line is obviously if they hit their ceiling, but also if 2022 and 2024 you hit a little bit of a nice little trend on edge players, and then down the line you got all these 6'4" plus behemoths playing inside. Now you've changed the profile a little bit,
Bingo.
Like you don't have Howard Cross types playing interior defensive line all over the place. Right now you have guys that are 6'4" plus with vines playing all up and down the line of scrimmage, and that's where things change. So we'll see.
Let's move on to the linebacker class, Ryan. For the second straight year, in my opinion, Notre Dame signed one of the 5 best linebacker classes in the country. I think it's absolutely indicative of how the rankings work, that when Peyton Bowen and Jaden Osberg committed to Notre Dame, they're both considered around top 50 prospects by just about everybody.
Yep.
And over the course of the next year, despite both having phenomenal senior seasons, they all continue to drop in the rankings all year, and not a spot or two, to where a couple people don't even have Peyton Bowen in the top 200 anymore, which is just insane to me. Or Drake Bowen in the top 200 anymore.
Yeah.
Which is just insane to me. Just further evidence of, and it's not even just about Notre Dame. It's kids that this happens to other schools, but it definitely seems to happen to Notre Dame quite a bit. Is how you could view Drake Bowen. Now, not everyone, right? And that's again, it's we haven't talked about it in a while, Ryan, but it's further evidence of just the weird variance in rankings that Notre Dame kids have right now. I mean, you look at Drake Bowen, and he's ranked number 45 by Rivals. And what's funny is Rivals actually they all have ranked some kids higher than others, but like Rivals is much higher on Brendan Vernon and Drake Bowen than everybody else, while other people have them lower. But Rivals has Drake Bowen 45th. ESPN has him 80th. 24/7 Sports has dropped them down to 156, and On3 has him at 220. Jaden Osbury, when he committed Notre Dame, was a borderline 5-star recruit. ESPN still has him number 58, but now Rivals has dropped him down to 205, and On3 has him at 193, and then 247 has dropped him down to number 243. Now, the one thing I like about Rivals is at least Rivals leaves their history of rankings in their system. And when you go back and look at where Jaden Osbury was when he first got started, you remember he committed to Notre Dame in August, right?
Yep.
In March of 2021, he was ranked as the number 24 player in the country.
Wild.
They did an update in November of 2021. He was 27, then he was 33, 39. And then in the rankings that came out right before he committed Notre Dame, he was ranked number 80. That was in July. And then they dropped the ranking right after he committed, which also came after he was the best linebacker, that Future 50 thing. They dropped him down in the very next ranking. He was 80th. He committed to Notre Dame on August 4th. They had a rankings release that came out August 16th. He dropped to 196th. So here's the deal. You want to talk about why I say this is a bunch of bunk? So they did a rankings release in November of 2021, which is by the time his junior season was over. And he was ranked 27th in the country. They had a rankings release in February, May, June, and August, he played 0 football games in that stretch of time. 0 football games. So first of all, why are you doing 4 rankings changes in the course of a period where their guys play 0 football? He had just gone to an ESPN, or not the ESPN, but the Under Armour Future 50 event, right? Where he was by many people thought was the best, one of the 1 or 2 best linebackers there. And 12 days after he commits to Notre Dame over LSU, he drops over 100 spots in the rankings without playing a single football game. And then he comes out this year, he dominates, and now in the most recent rankings in December 6th, he's dropped all the way down to 205. And I'm supposed to believe that there's not a bias to the rankings there.
Well, and
right?
They know that it exists too. I mean, I don't know if you saw Drake Bowen's post yesterday, Brian, but he was talking about, someone talked about the rankings drop, and then he retweeted, he just said, and none of us got worse at football or something like that.
Right.
And I was like, exactly. So right, man.
Exactly.
Because Brian, it's not like these are two. Look, Drake Bowen just won the Butkus Award, man, as the best linebacker in all of high school football. He was Mr. Football in the state of Indiana. Just had a dominant senior year. Jaden Osbury just set University Lab's all-time leading record in total tackles for the program that has put out guys like Dylan Moses and other great players historically.
Completely outplayed Arch Manning in that matchup, who they have as a top 5 player. I believe actually don't they have Arch number 1?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So hold on. When did so Braylon James commits to Notre Dame in April. Mm-hmm. He had gotten a bump all the way up to number 67, commits to Notre Dame. That very next ranking, which came out like a couple weeks after that, he drops to 77, then all the way down. They come out with another ranking. May 17th, he's at 77. They have another ranking that comes out a month later. Played 0 football, and he dropped from 77 to 205. Based on what?
It's not based on anything.
That's not, well, a couple guys, they saw a couple guys and a couple guys just passed him. So he commits to Notre Dame as a top 100 recruit, and then they drop him to 200 basically less than 2 months later.
Yep.
Right? So the reason we're talking about this now at the linebacker class is because this is an A class.
Yes.
I don't care what anybody says. And the fact that they were both ranked that high when they committed to Notre Dame, because remember, if y'all don't remember this, for a long time, people thought Drake Bowen was going to go south.
Yes.
Clemson, Alabama. They thought he was going to go south because he's not a native of Indiana. He's a native of Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And for a long time, we were the only ones really saying that Notre Dame was a team that was going to have a chance to go out and get Peyton or Jaden Osbury. A lot of people were saying it was Michigan, it was Texas A&M. A lot of people like that, right? LSU might get him. And we said, now we think Notre Dame's in a really good place here. And then as soon as he commits to Notre Dame, his ranking drops over 100 spots. 2 weeks after he commits to Notre Dame, it drops 100 spots. These are top 100 football players, Ryan.
Yes.
There's no doubt about it. These are top 100 football players.
I think that they might be top 50 players. Like, I think they might be. I mean, I think Drake Bowen is absolutely a top 50 football player. And I think Jaden Osbury is right in that conversation as well. I truly do, man. The accolades, again, like the accolades don't mean everything. But when you are voted the best linebacker in high school football, that means something, guys, right? Like, that means something. That means that you're the best nationally. So, yes, I think Drake Bowen's a top 50 guy. I think Jaden Osbury is a borderline top 50 guy. And we don't talk about Preston Zinter, who just had a really nice year for Central Catholic as well. I mean, he had 116 tackles this year and led his team deep into the playoffs. Like, he's a good football player as well.
He was like a top 250 caliber guy.
100%. And he gives you some versatility where if you have numbers clash at Viper eventually, maybe he's that guy that can step down and play on the ball a little bit. He's a good tight end, man. He's a real good tight end. Yeah. So when you put all that together, man, and they fit well together too, right, Brian? Because it's like, if Jaden starts out as a rover, for instance, right? Drake's your Will, Preston's your Mike, and it makes a ton of sense, right? Like, those guys all have different skill sets. They all play pretty well in space, which is great for the modern game. But I think that they all fit well together, fortunately for them.
Here's another one, Ryan. Preston Zinter committed to Notre Dame on February 11th. He was ranked as the number 214 player in the country in the rankings before that.
Yep.
The next two rankings, he dropped down to 219. He dropped down to 223. He is now not only not in the top 250. That's fine. 219 to out of the top 250. That's possible. You see more film, more kids break out. Happens all the time. He's now a 3-star on Rivals.
It's awesome, man.
Based on what? Based on what?
Is Micah Bell still a 3-star and like the 67th ranked player?
On 3?
Oh
yeah.
Oh
yeah.
my God.
Yeah. Let me see where they have him ranked. It's really bad. They have him as the number 90 player in the state of Texas. Yeah.
Oh, he dropped. They dropped him further.
To 64 at corner. Yeah.
That's insane, man. That must be the best corner group in the history of the world. I love it. It's fantastic.
Yep. So the linebacker position like just epitomizes what we talk about. When you say, "Oh, there's no bias." Yes, there is. I just showed it just some anecdotal evidence of that right there, right? So this is a really good class. I think it fits well together. My question early on was, who can be a Mike? I think Drake Bowen can flat out be a Mike now. He even to me, he even looks more and more like he said yesterday, like Will, but then he said, but they can move around. I view him as a Mike really, with what this defense is trying to do. He's a bigger, faster version of JD Bertrand. I mean, if we're being honest about it, I mean, as far as how he plays, and then Jaden Osbury it looks more and more like a Will to me. We kind of rover Will.
Growing.
Yeah. He could be a Mike too if he can get up to 225. You know what I mean? He just got to be able to get up, just put a little bit of weight on. But as a Will, he doesn't need to be 230 pounds to play Will.
He could definitely play. He could be the Nakobe Dean type of Mike in the system potentially for sure. Yep, agree.
Yep. So I love this linebacker class. It fits well together. It fits with what they did last year. I think a third you could have got away with 2 if Josh Burnham was still a linebacker.
Sure.
But I think you needed 3 now when you move Burnham there. And now you're talking about a situation where you may end up moving JD Junior to Alamaka there too. Then you definitely needed 3.
Yes.
Because you're going to solve Jalen Sneed and Nolan Ziegler at linebacker, but you definitely needed this 3-man haul this year at linebacker. So met the needs. They fit the defense. They want kids that can run and hit. And that's the thing I said about both of them. They can run and they can hit. And that's what both of those kids can do. And Preston Zinter's a good athlete. Again, I just haven't seen enough of him as a linebacker to feel great about just how he fits. But he's long. He's a quality athlete. He's physical. He's versatile. There's a lot of things he can do well. He's a good player. But he's just, to me, he's not quite the high-level player that other guys are.
And you also have some question marks about him playing a traditional stack backer, to your point, because he, fortunately and unfortunately for Central Catholic, he's the dude on that defense, right? So he's playing on ball, he's playing in space, he's playing tight end. So he's asked to do a lot of things, but he has the traits to do it. It's just about seeing it, actualizing that talent.
Yep. So we officially, Peyton Bowen is flipped to Oklahoma, as anyone on our message board knew that he was going to do. And he said he just wants peace for his family. So, yeah. Yep.
Could have peace weeks ago, friends.
Yep. So we are we're done with talking about Peyton Bowen. I really could not care less if we ever talk about him again. So it's time to move on.
Everybody knows my thoughts on that one. So
yes. So we're gonna. I'm only saying it now because he just announced it officially now, which we knew this morning. We put an update on it several hours ago at Irish Breakdown on it. So yeah, we are ready to move on to the guys that want to be at Notre Dame, and it was obvious that he never wanted to be at Notre Dame.
He's been committed to 3 different teams. That's fantastic. Good for him.
In a 24-hour period.
It's wild.
Well, a 28-hour period, he's been committed to 3 different teams. I've seen kids be committed to 3 different teams over the course of a year. It is not often that you see a kid committed to 3 schools in 30 hours. That takes the cake. Yes. That takes the cake for me. So, yeah, time to move on. Speaking of, it's a nice little segue to the safety class, right? Let's talk about the safety class, Ryan. Notre Dame signed what will now be a 3-man safety class still. They have a Don Schuler, who was obviously an early commit. They got Ben Minich this summer. And then Brandon Hillman will be a guy that we've talked about we like as a safety. Potentially sort of like a 3 safety look where maybe he's the rover and Don Schuler's the alley guy and Ben Minich plays over the top. Maybe a Don can play over the top at times. I don't love him as much there. And then Ben Minich can be sort of an alley guy. Jeremiah, and I think you could see a look where maybe a Don Schuler is sort of the rover. or Jeremiah Hillman, or it's Jeremiah Hillman. Because Jeremiah, he just reminds me so much of Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah that I keep calling him Jeremiah.
I love it.
Where Brandon Hillman is sort of that alley player too. I like the idea of having Hillman as sort of like a true 4-2-5 safety. And when I mean true 4-2-5, where it's literally 5 DBs, not the linebacker thing that they have now. Because let's be honest, the best rover that Notre Dame has had since they went to the 4-2-5 was a guy that was barely over 205 pounds. The lightest rover they've had was by far the best rover they had. With all due respect to Drew Tranquil, was very good in 2017. He was a much better inside linebacker than he was a rover, in my opinion.
Yep.
Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah is by far their best, and they struggled to keep him at 210 pounds. And so for me, I look at it and say, I would love to see, when you look at the schedule down the road, being able to go to a group of a 4-2-5 that is a true safety option is the way to go. And I think this safety class helps them get there. It was impossible to meet all the numbers needs in this class, Ryan, because honestly, from a pure numbers need, you might have argued for 4, but you just can't bring in 4 safeties in one class and expect to keep them all. You had to try to go 3 and then maybe get another 2 or 3 man class next year, or we'll talk about cornerback, maybe corners where you can find a way to move somebody. But to me, numbers wise, they met their need. I do. I think they needed to add a little bit of size and playmaking ability to the back end. I think they did that. Because I'll say this, one of the biggest issues in the safety position the last 2 years, it's not coverage. I'm actually pretty decent in coverage. They can't tackle. And I'm serious. I'm not trying to be sarcastic. It's a very bad tackling group. This group is made up of guys that can flat out tackle.
Hit. Yeah. Yep.
Not just hit. You're right. They can hit, but these are good tacklers, especially Peyton. Especially Adon Schuler and Ben Minich. They're very good tacklers. Like I said this to Don yesterday. Adon was always a really fundamentally sound tackler. Then his body blew up a little bit and became a punishing tackler. Yes. But the fundamentals were always there. The technique was always there. And so that's the thing that that you kind of like.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing how the defense evolves, Brian, because I think of it towards how Gary Patterson's TCU was in the early years, right? When because he was the guy that really kind of revolutionized the 4-2-5. And like you said, it was more of a 3 safety look. Like they played a lot of umbrella coverage, and that was a little bit different, right? Like both safeties could kind of rotate down, and you could still play too high because you had both guys that could be that alley player and be that type of dude that could play short zone. And you have that. I mean, you do. And I think the big key to this class for the safety group to be a good group moving forward is the fact that I thought Ben Minich had incredible growth as a senior and makes you feel a lot better about his potential to maybe be a deep safety in this system and to be that guy that can play over top, can play single high at points, because you know that Adon Schuler is going to come ready to go and he is going to throw his body around. He's going to be super physical. He's going to get what he can get out of his talent, man, because he's a talented kid and he's a ferocious competitor. So having him combined with a Brandon Hillman, that could be a little bit of kind of like an interchangeable type of thing, maybe between that rover strong safety spot. Because, hey, man, I haven't seen enough of Brandon Hillman from a coverage perspective because he was asked to do so much at Churchland. But what I know about Brandon Hillman defensively is my guy's a striker. Like, he is going to come up with some bad intention. He is going to lay wood on dudes. Like, that is what he is going to do. He is ferocious, 6'1", 190 plus pounds, physically imposing dude like Adon is. And then Ben Minich, to your point, Brian, when he's asked to run the alley and to work inside out, it's a very solid wrap-up tackler. He can do this stuff in the run game, but he becomes a key point of this class as far as how it fits together, because Ben Minich has the best traits to work over top, to be that true free safety type. And now you need him to be that kind of guy, the guy that we saw as a senior, but you need him to keep getting better, keep working on it, keep getting to a higher level. Because if he can, the safety class is good, man. Like it's going to be good. Yeah. It's just it has more question marks now because you don't have that top level true free safety type. You need
and that's why I gave it a B. And we didn't say this at the beginning. I gave the class a B because here's the thing. I want everybody to stop and think about this for a second. Okay, a B is outstanding, top 15. If you can talk about what they could have had, what they should have had, and all that kind of stuff, and that's all fair. That's all fair conversations to have. It's not for this show, but it's all fair conversations to have. But let me ask you this. Can you go around the country and look through all the different recruiting classes and tell me 15 groups that are better than this one? There are those that are better. Oh, Bama did this, and not arguing that. But can you point to 15 groups or 20 groups that are better than this one?
Right.
You can do that, and I would encourage you to do that if you don't believe me. But what I would say is, or you could trust me, and look, we're giving it a fair grade. It's a B because they met their numbers need. They have guys that can come in and play early, and they have enough. It's not as versatile as I would have liked, and that's the one thing where if you want to talk about what you lost when Peyton Bowen jumped out, he was a guy that could be a true free safety type. Yep. They don't really have that, although Ben Minich showed me more of that as a senior than he had as a junior. Mm-hmm. So those are the reasons I drop it down to a B. But you have 4 kids that at least one recruiting service ranks as a top 250 player, right? I mean, that matters, right?
And
that matters to me.
I would add in too, Brian, that Brandon Hillman's been a guy that I think has been underranked because he's been asked to play so many different positions. Like if he was just a safety his entire career, I don't know where he'd be ranked. I'm not really sure, if I'm being honest. Like maybe he's a top 150 kid. Maybe he's higher. I don't know. But I look forward to seeing that type of player on campus because when he settles in on one position and he focuses in on that day to day and the eye discipline and the schematics of playing and the approach, consistency, I look forward to seeing that type of player because maybe he can be that high upside type of player at the position because you just don't know because he was just asked to do so many different things in high school.
Yeah. To your point, right? The physical tools are there.
Yes.
The physical tools are there.
No doubt.
And I've heard people say, well, he's timed it. He ran a 4.7 electronic, but it was a while ago. He also ran a 4.2 shuttle. 4.7 is faster than Jalen Elliott. Mm-hmm. He's in the same speed range as Jalen and Alohi to me, which again, there was not that long ago. They were one of the 5 to 6 best safety tandems in the country. Right.
Alohi Gilman's starting games in the NFL right now.
Yes.
So,
yes. So to me, was it an elite group? No, it was a good group.
Really good group. Yep.
But here, Adon Schuler's another one. Mm-hmm. How did Adon Schuler go from the 198th player in the country, according to Rivals, in February to by June completely out of the top 250? Okay, fine. It's a 52-person drop, whatever. To now he's a 3-star. That impacts their rank. Like when you take a kid who literally less than a year ago you had as a top 200 player, goes out and he won like Player of the Year awards.
Yes,
in New Jersey, right?
State Player of the Year on defense. He had 103 tackles, 3 interceptions, and was also a key piece on offense when he needed to be, and a punt returner as well. So
and you have him as you dropped him. Now, if you always here's the thing about On 3, in their defense. They've never been high on Micah Bell.
Sure.
It's not like you could say they dropped him from a top 200 to 3-star because you can. I think they're wrong, but it's just that's how they view it. They've always viewed him that way. They've always been that. There's no bias there, at least that I know of. At least towards Notre Dame bias. How you take how you take Adon Schuler and have him as your top 200 player in February, and by December, you have him out of the top 300, out of the top, not only the top 250, but not even as a 4-star. They have 400 some 4-stars, Ryan. It's absurd to me. And again, it's Preston Zinter, Adon Schuler, guys that several months ago they had as top 250 players that they have dropped to 3 stars after outstanding senior seasons. Makes no sense to me. Now you could say, hey, look, out of the top 250, fine. Other players emerged and got better. Totally cool with that. But why are they now 3 stars? That's the part that's and the reason is it doesn't matter to me. It's not going to impact their careers. It impacts you all and how you view these things. And the perception that some of you guys have, well, they didn't reach these goals and this, that, and the other thing. Okay. So this is a good safety group. I will say this, my knock on it, and the reason I have, Chris O'Leary is one of those guys to me, he's got to show me something in 2024. Because I don't blame him for Peyton Bowen, but here's the deal. You striking out in 22 is why you needed a guy like Peyton Bowen so bad. And so you got a good safety group. You better follow up at the very least with a similar group next year, Ryan. And that's
Yes.
going to be an important thing for Coach O'Leary, who's done a
Yep.
good job with development, in my opinion, so far. Like the coaching part, he's done well with so far. It's the recruiting part that's a question mark for me.
Which is weird because you hear about his great personality and everything, right? Like recruits consistently say that, but I mean, it's definitely something to monitor. There's no doubt. And again, it's like one of those things again, Brian, that we've talked about with a couple of positions. It's just you lessen the margin for error, right? Like that's the point blank period to it, right? Like I still think that I think a Don Schuler could be a really good player at Notre Dame, really good, impactful player. I think Brandon Hillman could be a really impactful player. I think Ben Minich could be an impactful player. But now you need to count on all three of those guys to be impactful, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we know that the margin for error is getting smaller at that spot. That's just where we are. And safety is quietly a position that there's going to be guys that can fight for meaningful playing time. Like I still think a Don Schuler and those guys can still fight for meaningful playing time, especially early, but you don't have that guy that is like a seamless transition into being the dude early on, So that's just what we're missing, in my opinion.
The other part too is in defense of Coach O'Leary and the staff, they're being on Ben Minich early because one of the questions that Sean asked last night when I was on the Lucky Lefty podcast, Sean asked me, he said, "What would you say is the best evaluation?" And he thought I was going to say Boubacar because I think Boubacar has such a high ceiling. I said, but no, you look at Boubacar and everybody sees that. His tools are obvious. Some schools just didn't feel like the tools were worth the projection. You know what I mean? But the tools are certainly there. The reason I went with Ben Minich on defense is because I didn't see that one. Like they got it right. I didn't see it at first. I've said on the show, I said, look, I've been asked to give this kid a shot to go out and play his senior year and all this and to just give him a benefit of the doubt. And I said, I'll do that, right? I'll give the kid a fair shake. I didn't see it. I saw a 3.5-star kid, 3-star kid that was a good depth player. One thing we said, this kid's going to be a great special teams player. Yes. I just see a guy that could be a safety, a guy that could be an impact player at Notre Dame. And then he went out and played a senior year, and I was like, I was wrong. Like, that's one I missed because they saw something. Now, in my defense, it was a camp that I wasn't at that was the final straw for them. So I didn't have that data, which is why I was willing to give them the benefit of the doubt, is how well he looked at that camp. And then he came out in his senior year, and that jump in athleticism that he went from junior to senior year was a big thing for me because the one thing you and I said at the time when they got him right, because we both had some skepticism, like, we'll see how it plays out, but I just don't see it yet. He was a heck of a high school football player. I didn't see the Notre Dame level of athleticism. Right. I thought he was an Indiana, an Iowa, a Northwestern, a Minnesota, which is a good football player, but just not. Is that guy going to help you win a championship? Right. No. When we say he's an Indiana level player, it's not an insult to Indiana. Right. It's good football players. It's Division I football player. It's just not that Notre Dame going to help you win a championship kind of guy. As a senior, he was that dude.
Yes.
Right. And I've told this story before, but I have a friend of mine who covers Ohio State and was doing play-by-play at a playoff game, and I think it was St. X, and he calls me afterwards. He's like, the best player in the field that day was Ben Minich. Now, keep in mind, they have Malik Hartford, who's a top 100 recruit on that roster.
Who's the dude? Who's
committed to Ohio State? My buddy's an Ohio State guy, and I said, did Malik here's my first, did Malik not play? He goes, no, he played. He goes, it's just Ben was the best player on the field today, and it wasn't close.
Nice.
Right? And so – said, okay, that's great. And then you start watching the film, you're like, okay, they got this one right. Now he's got to translate it to Notre Dame. But that if Ben Minich was what we thought he was when he first signed, my view of this class is a lot different. So I think that signature was big for getting that evaluation right for them, one that I questioned at the beginning, is what saved this class. And then the other thing that saved this class too was Chad Bowden just, even though here's the thing I love about Chad. The class was set, but I think in the back of his mind, Chad had enough concerns about all the trips that Peyton Bowen was taking that he's like, I'm just going to make sure that we still have some dudes. And so that's what Khalil Barnes was. The problem there with Khalil Barnes was he wants to play offense, and Notre Dame really wasn't willing to give him that opportunity when it all was said and done.
Right.
But then he goes out and he finds this cat from Virginia named Brandon Hillman. And he says, we're going to take this kid. Why? Because this kid's a football player. Where's he going to play? We'll figure it out. But this is why you take a Brandon Hillman, because if Peyton Bowen leaves, you're good. If you need a rover, you're good. If you miss a receiver, you're good. Like, let's say Dylan Edwards decommits and they don't get Caleb Smith. Let's say Caleb Smith would have just decided to stay at Texas Tech. You're good because you can move this kid there. If let's say you needed a second running back, you had to have a second running back. You're good. You can move him there. And let's just say hypothetically, you get in a situation where your quarterback, you have a bunch of injuries at quarterback. Say we need a kid who can get us out of a game. You're good.
Yeah.
So those kind of guys are really rare. And this is exactly why they recruited him. So props to Chad Bowden for getting this one done. Because and that's the other thing where we got to say about Chris O'Leary is he didn't recruit this kid. Chad Bowden did. And so that's why I have to say, like, now Chris O'Leary, as Don said with this yesterday, did a great job with the Don Schuler. Great job. The tools are there. He just has to, he's young, right? And that's the thing. I'm not killing him. Like I'm probably harder on Al Washington than I am on Chris O'Leary in that same grade because Chris O'Leary is like 27, 28 years old. Al Washington's been doing this a lot longer. My expectation for him is higher.
And he has a reputation to begin with. Right.
So I need to see Coach O'Leary do on the recruiting trail what he is doing with his team, which is I think he's a pretty good developer of talent so far, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Now he just needs to be able to recruit, give himself a better talent pool to work with. This is a good first step, though. I will say that. It's a good first step. It's more so the concern comes from this good class, but striking out last year is really what comes for me.
Right.
Because I never liked Jaden Bellamy. Not liked, that's a harsh word. I never viewed Jaden Bellamy as – I think Jaden Bellamy is transferring to the level he was supposed to be at. He's transferring to Syracuse. That's the kind of player I think he is. Good, solid player. More of that level of Power 5 guy, not a Notre Dame guy. But you're left with zero safeties, and that's what drags the grade down a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, if you got a Xavier Nwankpa last year, for instance, right? Like you probably feel a lot different about this class, right? Like that's just kind of where you are.
That's where part of me wants to give him a little bit of a pass because it wasn't his fault that they lost him. If you know the story, and we're not going to say it public, if you know the story, now you could say he should have found out sooner what happened.
Sure.
Right? But I can't fault him for what happened with Xavier Nwankpa. But we'll move on from that because then people start asking like what happened and all that. I'm just not going to get into it. But anyway, let's move on to corner. For the second straight year, Notre Dame has landed, in my opinion, one of the 5 best cornerback tandems in the country. And this is a big one for me, Ryan. This is a big year for a couple reasons. Number one, let's just look at what it did. Meet the need. You needed 2 corners this class, you got 2 corners. I would argue that the decommitment they suffered, it was a mutual thing where basically one kid wasn't kind of doing what he needed to do, and the other kid was, the Notre Dame staff said, okay, cool, maybe you'd be better off somewhere else. He wanted to take some visits, and the staff said, hey, all these things like, look, we love you, you're a good kid, but maybe it's best for you to go somewhere else. That's Justin Rhett. Okay. And so they moved on to some other guys, and Christian Gray immediately became a top guy on their board. They looked at some other guys like Josiah Wagner and Calvin Simpson-Hunt, and then they come around to Micah Bell, and they landed Micah Bell. And I would argue that Micah Bell was a much better – Justin Rhett's a very good football player. I like Justin Rhett. I just – he's a big zone cover guy type of guy for me, not a man cover guy. And they needed man cover guys. And Micah Bell and Christian Gray are man cover guys. So you met your numbers need, you met your scheme fit need, and then you talk about the talent. Micah Bell, I've always liked from the minute they got him. I love that kid's talent. Christian Gray is one of those guys that had to grow on me a little bit. I liked Christian Gray at first, but I didn't love Christian Gray. But the more you study him, the more you watch his film, the more you get confirmation about the speed, the more I was like, okay, I like this kid. I think this kid can really play. And you become a lot happier with the kind of player that he is. And so, he's a guy to me that I look at and say top 100 player. I look at Micah Bell and I say top 100 player. I don't know how they're not top 100 players, to be completely honest with you, Ryan. And, so I think these are 2 guys that hit, and it's a strong 2-man class. So in no way, shape, form, or fashion could I possibly look at and say that this kid is anything other than this. This class is nothing other than a great class. And I'm very pleased, very happy with where this ended up at cornerback. And great scheme fit as well, and fit well together, boundary field, all that kind of stuff. I love this group.
Well, that was going to be my main point, was that I think that they fit together really well, and they're both so different, which is really because for me, Brian, like Christian Gray, I mean, first and foremost, we talked about it yesterday on the show with him and his mom, battle tested to say the least, right? Like he's faced against Ryan Wingo one week, and then next week he's facing off against Carnell Tate, and then he's facing off against guys like Aaron Scott, and then he's facing off guys like Jeremiah McClellan and Jeremiah Love. So, yeah, he's a battle tested 6 foot plus corner with length, athleticism. There's really nothing not to like about what Christian Gray brings to the table. And he fits kind of stylistically for me into what you've been successful with over the last couple of years with the Cam Harts of the world, with the Benjamin Morrisons of the world. Kind of those longer, twitchy corners is kind of what you've had a lot of success with. But I think the key that really brings this class to a borderline elite level is that then you go out and get a Micah Bell who is completely different than what you have right now. It's completely different. He is not as long as those guys. He's right around 5'10" and some change and 160 something, 170 pounds. But what he has is he has elite level athleticism. You want to talk about a guy that could potentially play outside and then on the next snap come inside and play man-to-man in the slot against a smaller body type? That's Micah Bell. Like, me and Brian, I know we were texting back and forth when you were doing comps for him, and Jair Alexander was the guy that popped in my head immediately because I'm like, that kid can match quickness for quickness inside and out. So I love Micah Bell. He's going to run, whenever he makes the attempt at the NFL, he's going to run probably 4.3 low, probably 4.32, 4.33, somewhere in that ballpark. He's incredibly fast, and he is a completely different football player than Christian Gray, which when you kind of put those guys together, it's going to be a really imposing tandem on top of what you're doing recently with guys like Benjamin Morrison, Jaden Mickey, continuing developing the past couple classes.
Let's talk about the cornerback recruiting as well, because this is where I think it was so important to get this good two-man class, because I think Christian Gray is a guy that can help you early in a lot of ways. I think Micah Bell needs more technical work, but he's so fast that you could find a role for him early. Obviously, the two freshmen last year played early. I still really like the 2021 corner class. I do. I still think Ryan Barnes has a chance to play at Notre Dame. And talking to sources after the season, it's not the talent that's the issue for him, right? They like his talent. It's just other guys are a little bit further along. That's kind of where it is. I still talk to sources at Notre Dame. They love Chance Tucker. They think he's got a chance to play at Notre Dame. The problem is you had Cam Hart, you had Tariq Bracy, you had Benjamin Morrison, you had Jaden Mickey, and you had Clarence Lewis. For me, getting this two-man group that I think can help you in 2023, if you can hang on to and I'm not telling you that these guys are going to leave. I'm just saying, it's the world we live in, right? They're not playing a lot, and they're 2 years in. If you can hang on to Chance Tucker and Ryan Barnes, I love them as depth players that could, if a guy goes down, hey, look, if somebody gets hurt and you got to throw Ryan Barnes or Chance Tucker in the starting lineup, I can live with that because I think these kids are good football players. Having them on the roster and hopefully keeping them here to battle for jobs and be a part of the depth, to me, puts Notre Dame in a position where I would have serious conversations this offseason about moving Clarence Lewis to safety. Serious conversations about that. Because with Peyton Bowen in the class, you kind of looked at him as that third guy to compete with Xavier Watts,
Ramon Henderson.
Yeah. I can't believe I was drawing a blank on that. No, you're good. I was, because you saw me, I was like, I was like stroking out over here. I was not good. But to me, you throw Clarence there, his game projects much better there to me than it does a corner. All of a sudden, his athleticism, which is okay for a corner, but not great, projects a lot better as a back-end player, in my opinion. And I'll give you a chance to rebut this, Ryan, if you'd like. And please do if you don't agree with me. But I think because I like Chance Tucker, and people write him off because, he's been passed up by – that's fine. Write off Ryan Barnes, that's fine. But Notre Dame still likes him. I still like him. And if those guys can stay and be part of – because you have to be prepared if Chase, Christian Gray, and Micah Bell can't play right away, you need depth there. And I think those two kids, if they can stay and keep working and developing their game, can be those players and step into the lineup if the need is called for. Then all of a sudden you say, hey, Clarence, you're going to play similar snaps, but we think you can help us here. Right. Sort of a nickel safety type of guy. That's what I would do. I would rather do that than go to the portal for some guy that, maybe pans out. And what are his motivations for being here? Is it just to get the NFL? Does he really want to be here? Is a portal safety really going to, like, for example, is Jonathan McGill really going to bring you a lot more than what you could get out of Clarence Lewis at safety? I like Jonathan McGill. He's a nice player. But is he really going to give you more than what you could get from Clarence Lewis?
No, I don't think so.
I don't either. So that's something I would do. And it's because you've now hit that third straight year of good corner classes that allows you to do it. And it's because these two kids, Christian Gray and Micah Bell, can play early that I believe helps them have the flexibility to make that decision. And I think they should. And if Clarence Lewis is smart, that sounded disrespectful. If Clarence Lewis really looked at what's best for his future and potentially playing past college, it's not corner. It's as a safety. Make that move now, because technically, he's a redshirt freshman this year.
That's wild, man. That's wild.
Redshirt freshman this year, right?
Yeah.
So he still has, so really 20. Well, no, hold on. He's a sophomore this year. Excuse me. He's a sophomore this year.
Yeah.
And so even though he's a junior in college, because in 2020 he played, but that year doesn't count. So 2021 was technically his freshman year, and this year was his sophomore year. So he still has 2 full seasons of eligibility remaining.
Yep.
As opposed to just 1, which he normally would have. So I'd take advantage of that. Go play safety, be part of a really strong 3-man group, and look at yourself and say, that is where you have a chance to play on the next level, in my opinion. Now, Ryan, that last part, I definitely don't know if you said you agreed with the move to safety. Do you believe he's a kid that could maybe find a home as a in the NFL, late round draft pick, free agent type of guy as a safety? I don't think he has any future at corner in the NFL, but at safety, I think he could find a home. I do.
Yeah. I think there's way too many limitations at corner. I mean, we've seen it in this. Like, he would be a zone-only corner at the next level, right? Like, that would be the only system, like a cover 2 heavy system where he's able to come downhill a ton. And there's just not a ton of teams that run that anymore, Like, it's not. More teams are now 4, match 4, like that type of systems where they're man teams, right? So it's not as prevalent as it once was. So it's difficult, right? And he's also a guy that has been passed up a little bit for snaps, right? So that's not going to be a great thing from NFL evaluators. But if he is a guy that can play safety, play a little in the nickel, you're making yourself more valuable, man, at the next level with the passing attack at what it is in today's game. The more you can do on the back end, the more versatility you can bring, the more valuable you become easily. Because the other thing is, that Clarence Lewis is going to play special teams. Like, there's no doubt about that, right?
Yeah.
Like, he's a tough kid. Like, he'll play special teams and he'll play it well. And then if he has some versatility on the back end, he could always stick, man. I mean, Matthias Farley, who was a good player at Notre Dame, a pretty good player, he stuck for how many years in the NFL and was a starter? Like, all right. And I mean, he found a home. He found a spot that made sense for him. He found a role that he could fill, and he filled it for a long time. So I think it's just about being versatile at the next level defensively. That could be a sticking point for you, because he's going to ace the interviews. Clarence is a great kid, right? You know that he's going to play special teams. So if you have some versatility and coverage for what you can do, then I think that you make yourself even more valuable in that way.
Yes, agree. But that's we're not having that conversation if Mike Mickens hasn't hit cornerback recruiting out of the park in the last 3 cycles, in my opinion. And I include the last 3 cycles because, again, you beat Jimmy Lake for Chance Tucker. Yep. Chance Tucker's a good football player. I just think Ben Morrison's an exceptional football player. Mm-hmm. Cam Hart's an exceptional talent at cornerback. That's the reason Chance isn't playing. It's like, I think sometimes people think that because a kid doesn't play, or even worse, if a kid gets beat by a younger player, it means he's not good. That's the thing. Chance Tucker's a good football player. Ryan Barnes is a good football player. There's just even better football players ahead of him right now. And so that's why I think those kids still have a future at Notre Dame, in my opinion. I think they're good football players. Just need to see them get that chance. And you've got great depth at corner right now. You don't have great depth at safety. Use the depth there to go there. And it's because of the stronger corner recruiting that you can do that, Ryan, in my opinion.
Yep.
Now, overall grade for the class, it's kind of interesting because my overall grade for the class is a little better than my individual grade for each unit. And the reason I do that is because you have to put them together and then compare them to the rest. And so, like, if they're an A- on offense and a B+ on defense, you'd think, well, then they can't be an A grade, right?
Right.
Well,
Yep.
they can, because some teams may be A on offense and C on defense, or vice versa. Because now you got to stack them as one team. And I will say this again. There are not 5 classes better than this one. There are not. Like, somebody down there gave him a B-. If you think this is a B- grade, that means you think it's a borderline top 15 class. And I'm sorry, you are way off if you think that. Way off.
Mm-hmm.
And so what are our grades? Again, let's go back to what our grades are. A, elite college football playoff caliber. B, outstanding to top 15 caliber. C, solid to top 25 caliber. So to me, I think this group is one of the 5 best classes in the country. I think the lowest I'd be willing to go is A-. Because again, I look at some of the classes ranked ahead of them and I say, boy, that offensive class might be better than Notre Dame's, but their defensive class isn't even close. Or that defensive class may be better than Notre Dame's, but their offensive class is not. And that's the thing that makes this class so good, is they're really good on both sides of the ball, and there aren't many teams that can say that they're the same. There just aren't.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the difference. That's what separates this class, in my opinion, from others.
Yep. I love it. I mean, I wish I could have a little more discourse, man, but discourse is not healthy, right? I agree with you. I mean, I think that people take the negative and run with it too much, right? And we're too hypercritical one way or the other. You know, everything's either fantastic or everything is the worst thing ever, right? So hyperbolic in senses, but I wouldn't trade this class, right? Like this,
Yeah.
I think this class is a tremendous class. The depth is everywhere to be found. There's impact talent at pretty much every spot. You know, we mentioned a couple of the spots that maybe don't have the high impact talent early on, but at least in those instances, if you didn't get the high impact talent, at least they got developmental impact talent, where if they hit, they could be really good football players. So you didn't completely strike out. I think that's my biggest thing, is that there's no position this year, like safety last year, where you struck out, right? Like, you didn't strike out. Could you have hit the ball a little harder? Possibly. Could you hit a little further? Sure. But you didn't strike out anywhere.
Right.
You did a good to excellent job at every single spot, in my opinion.
Like, here's an example. Everybody has LSU's class ranked ahead of Notre Dame's.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, look, they did a good job this year. Some good things in that class. But here's the deal. They signed 1 linebacker and 0 defensive tackles.
Mm-hmm.
Well, those are positions where they had needs beyond those numbers, in my view, right? And you look at last year, I mean, Harold Perkins is probably the best freshman linebacker in college football this year. Would you say that's accurate? I'm only saying probably because I can't tell you that I've watched every freshman linebacker this year. But of the ones I saw, I think Harold Perkins was the best freshman linebacker in the country this year.
Impact, very good player. Yep.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Not that it's a surprise. The guy was a 5-star recruit, right? But they only signed 2 linebackers last year. They only signed 1 this year. It's a problem.
And Perkins is also a little bit of a hybrid kid, where he plays on the ball a little bit too. So it's not even like he's a true stack.
1 defensive tackle last year, 0 this year.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of that LSU or Texas A&M thing we talked about. They're ranked higher because they have some guys that get the huge bump in points because of they're the 5 stars, right? Mm-hmm. And there's some groups like, so for me, LSU is one of the few teams in the country that you can look at and say their receiving core is in the conversation as being better than Notre Dame's.
Yep.
It is, right? Mm-hmm. Because Shelton Sampson, in my opinion, is better than anybody Notre Dame has as an individual talent. Jalen Brown's a really good football player at receiver. Kyle Parker's a good football player. Kai Prane is a good football player. All right. They got 3 tight ends. Now, to me, none of them are better than Cooper Flanagan, but they got 3 of them. And they needed 3. They met those needs. And so when I look at it, they got 2 running backs that are both highly ranked. Neither of them, to me, are as good as Jeremiah Love. But you look at the rankings, and they're ranked higher than Notre Dame's. Notre Dame not only had better needs, but if you look at the average ranking, Notre Dame had a higher average ranking. Texas has the number 3 class in the country, according to Rivals. Notre Dame is number 7. Notre Dame's average star ranking per player is better than Texas's. Why was Texas considered higher? Because Texas has the 2 5-stars who get the huge bump in rankings, that the points rankings up. So again, you can look at that way, or you can just look at, did this team meet their needs? And that's the key. That's the important thing. And so that's why I say those things don't matter a whole lot to me. There are not 5 classes in the country, in my view, that are better than this. Now, we're going to find out over the next 4 years.
Mhm.
But I'm excited about what this group is doing and excited about what this class landed. Yes, could have been even better. Could have been number 2, number 3, maybe number 1.
No doubt.
But at the end of the day, this is a really, really good group and
100%.
one that moves the needle for me.
Yes.
And I think the people that are down on it for 2 reasons. One, you still obsess over recruiting rankings. And number 2, you're still kind of in your feelings a little bit about what it could have been, not what it is.
Exactly.
And that's the reality of it.
Yep.
And the timing too. Like if Notre Dame would have never had Peyton Bowen, Keon Keeley, and Dante Moore in the class, and in the last few days landed Jeremiah Love on signing day, and Kenny Minchie the day on signing day, and Jaden Ausberry on signing day, and Braylon James on signing day. The feeling about this class is so much different because a lot of the reaction to it is an emotional one, not a practical. And we went through that, Ryan. We had an emotional reaction to some of these things.
And all those guys you just named would probably be ranked a lot higher than they are right now.
Bingo.
They were committed to Notre Dame.
Braylon James remained uncommitted or even committed but took 1 million visits.
Yeah.
And then was going to reconfirm whatever he's going to do on signing day and then asking for Notre Dame, he would have been a top 100 player by everybody.
Oh, no doubt.
Facts. If Jaden Ausberry would have remained uncommitted this entire time, took visits to LSU and Michigan and Texas A&M and all the schools that were trying to flip him, he'd be a top 100 player across the board. Right? That's facts. I mean, I showed you the evidence, everybody. I mean, I flat out showed it to you. And so that's what I'm saying is there are not 5 better classes than Notre Dame. I don't care what anybody says. And so, and to do it in the NIL era says even more about what this staff is capable of. And we said this on the show last night with Lucky Lefty. If Sean is right, and over the next year or so, a lot of this NIL stuff from a recruiting standpoint gets taken away, good luck to the rest of the college football world trying to stop Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Because if they're doing this while people are just flat out, Oregon just flat out bought a class yesterday.
They did.
Flat out bought a class.
And it's no secret. It's no secret.
They didn't hide it. They're not even hiding it.
No.
Then, if that gets taken away, they're not going to be able to touch Notre Dame. First of all, I wouldn't trade this class for their class anyway.
No.
But the point is, you take that away, and this staff is going to destroy people. There's no doubt. There's no doubt. And then I can sit here for the next 3 years and just pray, cross my fingers that Keon Keeley just decides to jump in the portal and come to Notre Dame. Could
you imagine, man? Could you imagine? It'd be wild.
That's my wish. So that's going to do it for the grades portion. We have some questions and some super chats we're going to dive to. So we'll do a quick mailbag here, but that is going to wrap it up for the grade show. Ryan and I are going to discuss about tomorrow. We're not quite sure what we're going to do tomorrow. Number one, please remember there's a chance I may not be able to be on the show tomorrow. We're supposed to get a really bad snowstorm tonight and tomorrow. We're stacked up. We've got water, we've got firewood, we've got all that kind of stuff. So we'll be okay. Family will be okay, but there's a chance it may knock power out and I may not be able to be on the show. So just to keep that in mind for everybody. But if we are able to do a show tomorrow, Ryan and I are going to talk tonight about whether or not we're going to do a mailbag again, or if we might push the mailbag back to the weekend and do sort of a 2-year grades and then what's next type of show tomorrow. So we'll let you know. And if not, we'll do that maybe over the weekend or next week or something like that. So we'll definitely let you guys know kind of that, but we'll do that over the next couple of days for sure. Ryan and I just haven't had a chance to talk about what the schedules look like. And we may do one at night and then one in the day. We've got to just go over schedule and figure that out, but we will be doing a show tomorrow. That's for sure. And if I'm not on it, I'm not on it. If I'm not on it, it'll be a mailbag. Just because I love doing the 2-year stuff and I want to do a part of that. And so I'm going to make the executive decision to say that that's not being done without me. But if I'm not being on the show tomorrow, we will do a mailbag and we'll be ready to go with that one. But so we'll let you all know. But the important thing is we will have a show tomorrow. It'll most likely be at 1:00. That's the plan. I'll be much better rested tomorrow than I was today. But before we head to the mailbag, folks, please hit that like button. Please hit the subscribe button. Please hit the notification bell. Share this podcast. Sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. We've had a ton of people sign up recently, so you're definitely going to be a part of that action as well. And, of course, follow the CFB Nation podcast. So sign up for that on YouTube. as well. We would love it if you guys would kind of help us get those watch hours out. We've put a couple videos up. John Garcia recorded some stuff today. I'll have those videos up later today on the CFB Nation channel as well. So you're definitely going to do that. We have the YouTube. So here's what we need from y'all. People say, how can we help? On the YouTube channel, watch the videos. Help us get the watch hours up. Okay, because we're getting close to 3,000 watch hours. We need to get to 4,000 before we can monetize that channel. So that would be very, very helpful. Okay. Then the other part of it is subscribing to the podcast app, whether it's Apple, Spotify, however you watch podcasts, and then sign up for the CFB Nation podcast there and listen to that. Those are the two ways y'all can help us. Great content. The CFB All-America guys put out a show today. It's already on the podcast app. I'll probably put that video up. I might put that video up later. I'm not sure I'm going to put that video up, but definitely going to put John Garcia's video up too. So there are some videos on there. If you guys could check them out, we'd greatly appreciate it. Help us get those watch hours up. Would be really amazing. Right now, Ryan, I'm just going to kind of go look up where we are right now as we're wrapping this thing up here before we move on to the mailbag. But right now, if you look at our analytics, we are currently, let me see here, for the lifetime, we finally passed 3,000 watch hours. So nice. That's obviously really good. So we're now over 3,000. So we're 3/4 of the way there. So if y'all can help us get there, that'd be awesome. And then, of course, check us out on the podcast app, CFB Nation. Let's go over to the mailbag, Ryan, and we got started off right here with Let Manager 1 with a super chat. Thank you very, very much. I believe that is from Canada, so our Canadian friend. We appreciate you very much, eh? Great shows yesterday. Voice sounds great, Ryan. Merry Christmas, guys.
It did not sound great earlier, man. I woke up, I sounded like this. I could not talk, man. It was terrible. It was terrible.
Ryan was about to jump on the show, sounding like he was part of the guy on The Sopranos or something like that.
Man, I sounded like an old Italian guy. Like it was awful this morning.
You're like, you're not either of those things. Forget about it. The last time you're going to talk to me like that.
I'll make you an offer.
So I'm glad you're feeling better. Very, very much. Charlie White's his last belt loop. Thank you for the super chat, Charlie. Hey, Coach, I want to say I appreciate your grading on offense and defense. You were extremely fair. I do have concerns with the D-line and safety. Thank you, IB. I think if you're going to say you have concerns in regards to are these groups good enough to be a championship units, I think that's very fair. And that's the thing is like there are parts of this recruiting class that aren't quite by themselves championship caliber groups. I think that's very fair. So I'm okay with you saying that, Charlie. I mean, I'm good with that. I just think as you put them all together, I think this is a really, really good class. This is a great class in my opinion when you put it all together.
It's about the full product, right? Like it's across the board. You didn't really miss anything.
But to his point though, Ryan is like, but it's okay to point out where it's got to get better because that should always be the goal, right? Until you start recruiting like Bama, it's saying, well, we can always get better. Now, will you ever recruit like Bama? I don't know. I probably not, at least from a recruiting ranking standpoint. But that's always the goal is to be the best, to recruit better than everybody. And until you get there, you always got room for improvement. So very fair thing, Charlie. Appreciate you. The next comment he's going to have, I'm not so sure I'm going to say is fair, but we'll get to that. Sean Michael says with a super chat, thank you very much, Sean Michael. Thank you, IB staff, for all you do. You're welcome, sir. Yesterday's shows were top notch and show why you guys are the best. Also very excited about Vernon. Perfect fit.
I think he is a very good fit as far as playing multiple positions in the defense, and he gets you longer, right? Like, I mean, he could be a strong side defensive end. He could be a 3-tech. He could be a nose eventually. Yeah. So I agree. I mean, he gives you a lot of traits that you're excited about if he's developed properly. I mean, because that's the thing about Brendan Vernon is I think that people have this assumption that, with his profile that he's this ready-made floor kid. And I don't think that's true. I think he's got a lot of upside still left to tap into. Yes. And if he gets there, man, and I think he will get there because this kid loves to play, man.
Because what he looks like, right? That's why people think he's ready-made because of what he looks like. He looks like a grown freaking man.
Yes.
Right? Like, so I think there's this, like you said, there's a perception that, he's ready to come in and play. He's close to his ceiling. Brendan Vernon's not close to his ceiling.
No.
Not close to his ceiling. And so now
what was your upside grade on him? Did you have him as a 4? Oh, you had a 5. Wow.
As an interior guy. I have 2 grades for him. You'll see it when I come up with my thing. I'm going to have my rankings out. I'm going to try to get it out later today. It may not come out till tomorrow because it takes a lot to kind of like write out and put together. But I have my rankings out. I have 2 for him. 4.5 stars a big end. 5 star if he moves inside.
Love it.
Because I think as an interior guy, he could be elite as like either just a penetrating nose tackle or just a butt kicking 3 technique. I think he can be, his upside is even greater. Now his floor is higher as an end, in my opinion, but his ceiling is higher inside. In my,
I agree with that. I agree with that. Yeah.
So good. I like it when you agree with me. It's more, I'm kidding. Charlie Weiss's last belt loop also said this. Do you really trust? Thank you for the super chat, Charlie. Do you really trust Clarence Lewis at safety? He will get beat. He will get beat there instead of at corner. I don't think he improved that much compared to the last year. I strongly disagree with that. I think
he's much better.
He got beat once this year, and it was a play that he misplayed. I was sitting there watching. He misplayed the route, and he thought he had inside help. That's why he played that. Other than that, when did Clarence Lewis get burned this year?
He didn't. Gave up a couple hitch routes. If we're talking about him getting beat,
I mean, so I don't understand how you can't say he didn't improve this year. He was a very good player this year. He's not as good as Benjamin, not even close to being as good as Benjamin Morrison.
I also think that he's a better player coming forward, right? So working from depth a little bit is interesting because was it against Navy where he had that interception coming kind of over top? Like that was
from across the field. It was actually not a deep shot. It was like an intermediate throw, but he came from across the field. It was that halfback throw.
Yeah.
Right. It was a very good play. It's a very good.
It was rangy, man. For a second, I was like, was that Cam Hart? Then I was like, wow, that was Clarence Lewis. Oh,
well,
okay.
He had a similar pick like that against Florida State a couple years ago. As a sophomore, that was similar to that. I just think here's what I think sometimes, Charlie, and look, I'm saying this to you in a way not to criticize you because I have this issue and I have to remind myself of that. A lot of times, this is why first impressions are so important because it is much harder to change your initial impression of someone. So like if you meet someone and they're just acting like a total idiot, and this is why I got to remind myself sometimes, like, dude, not everybody knows you. You got to, but
tone it down.
Not tone it down, but just when you're around people you don't know, you can't act like you always do when you're around people, because they may not like if you have a really dry sense of humor and you're my friend, I know you, I think it's hilarious. But if I don't know you, you just kind of come across as a prick.
Yeah.
Because you're not as expressive in your humor, that kind of thing. But
my wife tells me to tone it down all the time. So I get it.
I get that. But, when I look at Clarence this year, Ryan, I think kind of what happens is that people just kind of lock into what their original opinion was. And then they had that bad thing that happened to him last year in the bowl game. And you're like, boy, that's a really rough deal. That's a really rough deal. But then you go outside of that and you say, like the Ohio State game, he gave up 4 receptions for 34 yards. On 3 of those catches, he was locked. He was all over a dude. But a future top 10 NFL draft pick was putting the ball on the flipping money, and future first-round draft picks of receiver were making great catches.
They were.
Like he gave up the 80-yard touchdown against North Carolina. It was a bad play. We've talked about that. But he only gave up 292 yards the rest of the year. I mean, he was solid. He was solid, but he's just not an elite corner in our view, right? And that's the kind of the point Charlie's making. But like, here's what he gave up the rest of the year: BYU went 0 for 2 on him. This is according to Pro Football Focus. Stanford went 3 for 5 for only 23 yards. UNLV went 3 for 3 for 24 yards. I think got outplayed for a deep ball there. Syracuse went 2 for 2 for 26. I do not remember them catching 2 balls on him in that game. One catch against Clemson for 8 yards. 1 catch against Navy for 20, and that was not on him. By the way, I remember the play they're talking about. That was not on him. But that's the problem with the way that Navy works. Boston College had 1 completion for 5 yards, and then USC had 2 completions on him for 10 yards. When did he get beat? Outside the North Carolina game, when did he get beat? When did he get beat deep? The longest, I'm looking here. Let's see the longest reception he gave up other than that 80-yarder was the 20-yarder against Navy. After that, it was 11, 11, 19, 10, 15, 13, 8, 20 against Navy, 5 and 5. When did he get beat, Charlie? Right? We're still living in that world. But why did he get beat when he did? Because he's not a guy that can come up at the line of scrimmage, in your face, play man coverage, and run with you vertically. That's not his game. So if he's going to be playing vertically now, it's off the ball 10 yards and opening up over cover 2. And then, like Ryan said, his ranginess becomes impactful. They're not going to put him in a situation where they're going to say, okay, as a safety, we're going to have you cover Josh Downs every snap this game. Right. If anything, you're not put in those situations, but I think his rank, and he's a smart football player. I think the
Mhm.
best parts of his game get accented more at safety than they do at corner.
Yep.
And so I don't see why some people view him the way that they view him. And here's the other thing too. If it's not for him in 2020, that defense falls apart in November in 2020. Him
Mhm.
stepping up when Tariq Bracy lost it in 2020 helped save that season because he played very well down the stretch. Very well down the stretch. He had a couple really bad games. He was not good as a sophomore. He was good as a freshman, and he was good this year. It's just that Benjamin Morrison was great this year. That
Mhm.
was the problem. And they kept playing him in the boundary, and he's not a boundary corner. He's a field corner.
Yes. Because you want him to play off and then have to come down, right? Like
Right.
that's the biggest thing. You don't want him to have to press and then have to turn and run because he's a pretty loose athlete and he's pretty explosive coming
It's not
downhill.
fast.
But he's not a turn and run with you type of guy. That's just not him. It's not him.
Yep.
That's
Some
okay. It's okay.
Right. Some people and that somebody else brought this back. He had a really nice pick against being in position against Cal that would have been very similar to a type of play he would make as a safety. It was deeper. It was kind of across the field. You remember the one I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And it got negated because of the J.D. Bertrand targeting.
Yes. Yep. That was a nice play.
Somebody just put that in. I think it was Mace AK, I think, is who put that in the chat. Let me make sure I can. Yes, it was Mace AK put that in the chat. I forgot about that. That pick, that play that got negated in that game. So, again, we're not saying he's going to go there and be Kyle Hamilton, but I think he's a kid that you put. I think it could be better than DJ Brown for sure.
Yes. Agree.
And Clarence is a solid tackler too. That's the other part of this thing as well. So, yep, there you go. But I appreciate the question. And look, I appreciate that you asked, Charlie. I mean, ask us to explain ourselves. Look, if we just make a statement and we're not willing to back it up, then we're not people you should listen to, buddy. So I actually appreciate this question very much.
It's really funny because I know his name probably isn't Charlie, right?
No,
and it's
it's
just
not.
so funny. Let me just call him Charlie.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if he wants his name out there. That's why I don't.
No,
call
I
him
get
by
that.
his
I
first
get
name.
that.
Yeah.
It's just funny because we just like on a first name basis now. It's not even his name. It's just pretty funny.
Yeah. So, well, that's the thing is like when people have these names and I know what their real name is, I'm like, I don't want to accidentally slip because then some people may view that as doxing, and I don't ever want to put somebody's name out there that they don't want out there. So I got to be careful with that, but I appreciate him. JP Buellsfeld, Brian, I just want you to know how much I appreciate you, especially a drama day like yesterday. I hope you get rest and have a Merry Christmas. I'm definitely going to get some rest later today. I took like a 15-minute nap yesterday. Felt glorious, man. It was like before the Lucky Lefty show, and I was still passing out by the end of that show. I apologize for being so tired. I felt bad for yawning so much towards the end, but it was a great show. If it wasn't for Malik and how good Malik was last night, I probably would have fallen asleep during that show. Malik was great last night. He was really good last night. Like he was peak Malik form.
I tuned into that show a little bit last night. He was on fire. He was on fire.
He said, "We don't negotiate with terrorists."
I did see that. I did see that.
So awesome. 99 problems with BK1 question: if Notre Dame had only ever landed a Don Schuler, Ben Minich, and Braden Hillman in the first place, and never had a decommitment and drama, would the position class be viewed differently? I'm gonna say this, Ryan, and I'll let you go with it. The grade would be the same. The perception would be much different.
Yes. Yep. I feel like people would be optimistic more than they are now because it's what you lost. It's not what you gained. The perception is completely different to your point, right? It's the players aren't any different though. It's not like you're gaining a different player. It's the same exact core. It's just that you didn't lose a 5-star. You didn't lose a big time kid. You got 3 though, good to very good football players. And you would be excited about that. So I agree. The perception just has changed in that situation.
Yes. Here's the other thing. I would say this. I feel like the drama of Peyton Bowen the last month overshadowed the pickup of Brandon Hillman.
Agree.
Because people were so focused on Peyton that you just don't even hear a lot of people talking about Brandon Hillman. And that kid is a flippin' really good football player.
Yes.
Because it was I'll never forget his recruitment, not just because he's a Virginia guy, but because of everything that was happening at the time. Remember, Ryan, that was the day that I drove back from Purdue. Rita was still in the hospital at Purdue. Angela was still in West Lafayette at the hotel with Sadie. And, I brought Sadie home with me. I came home and was going to go back, but I was just so tired. So I stayed here. And then that's when we got the call that, hey, keep an eye on this kid. This is a kid we really like. This is a kid we're going to go after. And so then I made you watch this film, and you were like, who the heck is this kid? How has nobody offered this kid yet? Like, because our first thought was, does this kid not have grades or something? Like, is that why he doesn't have an offer list more impressive? And then you find out it's because for a while here, he told people he wanted to be a quarterback. And so, people are going to offer him. But I don't know if I'm allowed to share the backstory on that, but I'll just say this. The recruitment of Brandon Hillman and the rankings bump he got, you can put on Chad Bowden. I'm just saying he finagled the heck out of that one from a PR standpoint and some of the things he did behind the scenes, not asking people to up his ranking. I'll just say this. Let's just say I believe there was maybe some conversation that was had with other people in the coaching world, like, boy, this kid's really good. You guys should maybe look at him. And then all of a sudden the offers start coming in. And now all of a sudden the recruiting analysts start paying attention to this kid. But already by then, Notre Dame had already kind of got in a great position already. And then we saw it happen. So this is one of the many reasons why I think Chad Bowden is a monster as the recruiting coordinator at Notre Dame. Like, I don't think y'all realize how involved he is in this. Like, look, the assistant coaches have to do their job. A recruiting coordinator can't do it all by himself. Mm-hmm. But I don't think y'all realize how vital he is to making this whole thing work. Like, if Chad Bowden is not the director of recruiting at Notre Dame right now, they do not have a top 5 class, in my view of a top 5 class. Because I know for a fact 3 or 4 kids that probably don't end up at Notre Dame if he's not here.
Sure.
They just don't. They just don't. Do you disagree with that, Ryan? I mean,
no, I don't.
The only person whose name we hear more than Chad Bowden's Marcus Freeman, and that's even debatable. Like, the only debate there is who's first, who gets told first, right? But those two as a 1-2 punch are outstanding.
And they all love Chad too, man. Like, they love Chad. I remember when I did Jeremiah's interview and I asked him about Chad, he just started giggling. He's like, yeah, Chad. He's like, they love that guy, man.
Yeah,
love him.
They do. And he's a straight shooter with them. That's the other thing they like. You know what I mean? So he does a great job, because assistant coaches need that during the season. They need a guy that can be grinding on the phone and the DMs and the text messages while they're trying to get ready to figure out a way to beat Clemson or USC or BC or
meet kids at the airport and have a boombox and dance. That's what they need, man. They do.
So, I know there's some folks that have been at Notre Dame a long time that don't care for Chad. That's why those people need to be gone.
Yeah,
because they're the ones holding them back. This is the way it's got to go. A guy that with his energy and his strategy, and the other thing too is Marcus Freeman needs allies, and there's nobody on campus that has his back more than Chad Bowden. That's the other part.
Agree.
And so that dude's an absolute rock star when it comes to recruiting. There's no doubt. He will be. People will look at him in 10 and 20 years the way that people my age and older look at Vinny Serrato now. Right. So
let's hope.
There's no doubt. There's no doubt.
Yeah.
There's no doubt. See here, we got another super chat from Charlie. He says, it could be a perception thing, but he has displayed. It seems it's always was him involved on big blows. I admit I'm wrong. Justin Scott confidence 1 to 10. So the second part was a question. So I appreciate you saying that you're wrong, but yeah, we're not saying he was a great player, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's a solid corner. He's at best a solid corner. I'm not saying he's a great corner. He's a solid corner.
Yeah.
But his issues he had is because he was put in position to not do things he should be asked to do, but it's because that's the nature of the defense. Our point is, as a safety, the nature of the defense is going to put him in position to do the things he's good at already.
Yep.
And that's our point. So I kind of understand where you're coming from, Charlie. I just don't think he's bad or burned all the time like you do. But when put on an island like he was in the bowl game, he's not going to play well. Mm-hmm. But he's not put on an island very often as a safety. And when he is, he's playing from depth. Yep. And he keeps everything. When Clarence Lewis, and this is the point Ryan made, and I'm going to say it this way. When Clarence Lewis can keep things in front of him, he's a very good football player.
Yep. When
he has to flip his hips and have a guy and be in trail position, that's when he gets in trouble. Mm-hmm. And he would almost never be put in that situation as a safety.
Agreed.
Almost never. Yep. And that's where we come from, Charlie. But I appreciate you. So his question was confidence level from Justin Scott 1 to 10.
I would say it's like a 5 right now because, look, we talked about this a ton, man. They got on him so late for whatever reason. Like it was an oversight. It was a misstep early on in this recruitment. So you let teams like USC, Michigan, Alabama, those types of teams get into the conversation. That's what you've done, right? The truth of the matter is, excuse me, is that a Catholic kid from Chicago,
It's starting to go.
starting to go a little bit, starting to go. Catholic kid from Chicago playing that position in Notre Dame's backyard right now
with grades,
with grades that values his academics at this point in this recruitment should be about an 8 or more, or he should be committed to Notre Dame.
Yes,
that's where we are right now.
He should have been the first defensive lineman you offered in this class.
That's where it should be right now, man. But it's at a 5 right now because do I think Notre Dame still has a chance? Yes, I think they still have a chance. But you let a lot of big players get into the conversation, and that's where it's a little murky, right? Now you have to play against the USCs, Alabamas, Michigans, like those notable programs that also have big brands. So I think Notre Dame could get back into the top tier of this conversation. I think that they can win this one. But as of right now, you were just on them a little too late, and you let other really good programs get involved. So that's where you are right now.
Absolutely. Let's get down here. Here's a question here, Brian, that I'll give to you because you have some intel on this. We should have put this on the board. I should have told you to put this on the board earlier, but we did not because it's been a crazy couple of days. But Milton Fan 15, any update on Braden Fisk?
Yes, there is an update on Braden Fisk. So I was told by a source that it's basically come down to 3 different schools, but the 2 main schools that are at the top of the list are Notre Dame and Florida State, which is he's taken 2 visits.
The third would be USC.
The third would be USC. Yep. So you're looking at Notre Dame and Florida State, though, as the main 2 teams, and then USC is kind of a little bit further down into a tier, it seems. And he's visited both schools for weekend visits over the last few weeks. I'll say this about Braden Fisk. I think Braden Fisk would fit seamlessly at Notre Dame. And I think that he enjoys everything that comes with playing football up north. Florida State is just something different, right? And different could be appealing to some. Different could also be scary to some, right? And I don't know how comfortable he would be going down to Florida. And I think that Notre Dame would make a lot of sense for him. And I think he has a lot of love for the Notre Dame program. So
Notre Dame wants him bad.
Yes, Notre Dame wants him very bad. And he's kind of, right now, it's kind of about what are the pros, what are the cons of each program, and trying to figure a thing out. So I think Notre Dame has a very good chance, but they have to close that one out. I think they do have a great chance.
And we will have an article coming out on him later tonight. It's going to be by both of us. I'm going to talk about the need, and then Ryan's going to talk about sort of the physical tools. So, by the way, Ryan, I forgot. I'm going to tell you that right now. I need you to work on just putting a little quick couple paragraph analysis of him as a player because he's exactly what Notre Dame needs. He's big. Yes, he's a playmaker. He could play 5 technique in their 3 down fronts and provide some. I mean, if you put like him and Riley Mills on opposite ends in a 3 down look, that's the kind of 3 down front that you need.
Good
right?
luck.
and he could play nose and be a disruptive nose. He could play 3 technique and be really good there. That versatility, he's got experience. He's got grown man strength. He's going to be, I think, a 6th-year senior next year, right? So he's grown. You know what I mean? Like he's got that veteran strength, and he's going to then get to spend a whole 8 months in the Notre Dame strength program. And with all due respect to Western Michigan, it's not the Matt Baylor strength system. So that's the other part for him. If he's looking at trying to get to that next level, dude, the last thing that you're missing is like that kind of strength program. And, you get him in that, and all of a sudden he puts on 5-10 pounds. And because did you see how much blown up Chris Smith was this year?
Yes.
He was huge compared to where he was. And he was faster. That's the thing is he was quicker because he finally was in a Notre Dame type of strength program. And again, no disrespect to Harvard. Your resources are more limited. The best of the best are going to be at a Notre Dame, not a Harvard, right? And so he is a really good player. He turned into he could be a really good player in the Notre Dame if you give him the Notre Dame resources between now and next fall. I think he could be a really good player.
He had a tough decision to make this offseason because he had some borderline draftable grades from teams. So if he goes to a team like a Notre Dame or Florida State, he could blow up from a NFL draft perspective as well because he has that versatility. I mean, against Michigan State, he had a really nice game, and he was forced to play on the edge against Michigan State a ton at 6'4"
in a 4-down look, right, Ryan? I mean, he had to play on the edge in a 4-down look, not even a 3-down look.
Which is wild. So he's got versatility to him. He's a physical football player. and he grew up 30 minutes from Notre Dame's campus in Michigan City, Indiana. So it makes a lot of sense. Notre Dame has to close the deal on that one.
Yep. Here's something from Cape Cod. So have either of you heard that portal QBs are possibly avoiding Notre Dame due to Reese? I can assure you right now that there is not a single good portal quarterback that has avoided Notre Dame. And I'll just leave it at that. Not a one. So if anybody's saying that, it's some Notre Dame hate fan. It's either coming from some Notre Dame hater, it's coming from some Notre Dame fan who doesn't like Tommy for whatever reason and is starting some stuff. But I can assure you on very good authority, Ryan can as well, from talking to other sources, not just Notre Dame ones, that portal quarterbacks have been very engaged with Notre Dame. And that's all I'm going to say. And we'll have clarity on that here in the next couple of weeks. But that's all I'm going to say. So anybody saying that to you, Cape Cod, I would tell them to keep their mouth shut because they're lying to you. Yep. And I don't like talking to liars. So I would hope that you would not either.
Brian, can I add one comment real quick about Braden Fisk? Because I just saw Berkshire Yank just asked what's the timeline. So Berkshire, I talked to him about a week ago, a little bit more than that at this point. He told me originally it was the beginning of January was something because he's going to be a 6-year senior, like Brian said, right? So he's not trying to rush a decision. He understands that the next calendar year is make it or break it for his future, right? Like it matters. So I don't think he's going to rush the decision, but I do think that he has enough data right now where it's formulating right now. So I would expect beginning of January sometime.
And like you said, he's looking at it different academically too. He doesn't have to worry about getting his courses lined up and all that other kind of stuff. It's a completely different animal for him than it is for others. We have a super chat down here from Mark 1. Good show, guys. Merry Christmas. I think Indy has upgraded the team. I'm excited for our team. Mark, I'm with you. First of all, Merry Christmas to you and everyone else as well. But yes, I agree. Notre Dame is this recruiting class made Notre Dame better. I think the only argument is the degree. But there's no question this group made them better.
Absolutely.
On both sides of the ball. I think it's just a little better on offense because there was more of a need on offense, and it's just a little better class on offense, but it was also the need was greater. So it moves the needle even more to where now the offense is starting to catch up to the defense is what's going on, which is where they need to be.
Okay.
Here's an interesting question, Ryan, from Spark5219. You don't have to answer this question, but can you put a total dollar amount guess on the amount of money our fantastic class turned down to Notre Dame? And so when we talk about offers, it's over a 4-year period is basically how it works. I was trying to do this math off the top of my head, Ryan, and just quickly, I'd say at least 5 million, at least.
I think it's way more than 5 million.
I'm saying at least. I'm just I'm just because I didn't even get to the defense and I got 4 the whole.
I think there's that. I mean, we're not going to put names out there, but I think there's one player on offense specifically that was probably offered at least $4 million from various teams. So if my math is correct.
Oh, you and I are going to have to. No, you're going to have a conversation about that one. I don't know who that would be. As far as because the one offer that we got, the biggest one that I remember was closer to the one that we reported about Peyton Bowen.
Well, I'm saying in total though, when you take all the teams together, like
gotcha.
I just meant like 4 million.
The way I was looking at it, I'm sorry, Ryan. I get where you're coming from. The way I was looking at it is I was taking the biggest offer that each kid had and adding it together.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right. Because one kid can't take 3 offers is the way I was looking at it. Right. Yep. So I was looking at it from the standpoint of, but yes, I know who you're talking about. That kid probably got over 4 million in total different offers, but he couldn't have been 4 million because it was individual schools.
Gotcha. Yeah.
I at least 4 or 5, and that's only the ones that we know of. And I think it's more because I'm just trying to do the math in my head. It may be close to that, just offensive players.
Yep.
So it was a lot. And that's just the stuff we know. I'm sure there was other kids getting offers that we don't talk to and that haven't told us that information.
Yeah. I'm going to have to do some math because if we're talking about just like all the teams that have offered to each player combined, it's a hefty amount.
Crazy. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. All right, here we got a question up here from Trucker Joe. Thank you very much, Trucker Joe. Texas being ranked multiple spots ahead of Notre Dame when Texas signed 14 blue chippers compared to Notre Dame's 20 shows how overrated the point system is. And I didn't know this blue chip ratio coming in the season. I think one time somebody brought it up. I didn't know what it was talking about. Basically 4 or 5 star players. But I believe this is accurate. I'm going to have to go out and crunch the numbers. But I think there's only 3 teams that have been over 80% each of the last 2 years. And it's Alabama, Georgia, in Notre Dame. I believe. I could be wrong on that. There might be another team or two, but I believe that's the case. And that's the key, right? It's, it's a really good class.
Yes,
Really
it
good
is.
class. But no, you're right, Trucker Joe, because again, it's that's what the recruiting rankings do. They pump up the really top line guys, get way too many points relative to, like, a guy that ranks 30th should not be that much higher point value than the guy ranked 90th, right? Like, it just should. And the guy ranked first should not be that much higher than the guy ranked 40th when you're talking about a crapshoot, especially since not every number one ranked player is the same every year. With all due respect to Arch Manning, who I believe is the number one player according to Rivals, I believe. Let me just look this up real quick. And this isn't even a shot at Arch. He is ranked number one. Let's just say hypothetically that you and I agreed that Arch was number one. Okay. He's not Trevor Lawrence. It's like the NFL draft. Just because you're picked number one doesn't mean that you're expected to be John Elway or Peyton Manning, who are also number ones.
Right.
It's just, of the guys in the draft, you're the best player plus the need that we have. Like, does anybody think that Trayvon Walker was drafted with them thinking that we're hoping he can do for us? Because it was the Jaguars that drafted him, right?
Yeah.
Does anybody think the Jaguars drafted him thinking we hope he's going to do for our defense what we hope Trevor Lawrence does for offense? No, they don't. And
he also hasn't been very good so far.
Shocker. Who knew? But my point is, Ryan, is that you're going to get that kid's going to get the same point value that Trevor Lawrence gave Clemson, and he shouldn't.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with the ranking-based system.
Agreed.
And if you have one guy that's super overrated, it's going to blow everything up because your class is going to look way better because that guy's so overrated. So, yeah. No, I think that's a great point by Trucker Joe. There's no doubt about it. Great. 99 props, a BK1. This is kind of a comment. It says Notre Dame could get better on the edge on the D-line, sure. People immediately think of the 2021 Georgia D and their D-line, but their cornerbacks and secondary were suspect. Notre Dame's 22 plus 23 cornerback haul is fantastic. Overall, D is made up differently, but I think they are improving all over, and the way the D-line, LB cornerback groups complement each other, they could be unreal on defense in a couple of years. I think that's accurate, especially when you consider what you built that on top of. Right. And that's right. Now you got to keep doing it. Keep doing it. So, Ryan, if you got to run, go ahead. We're getting close to the end. So we'll probably be another 10 minutes. So if you got to go, you got to go. All right, man. Appreciate you. All right. Next question is from Anthony Bell. And Anthony says, do you think recruiting momentum will pick up over the next few years as more talent comes in and gets drafted on day 1 and 2? It feels like the best selling point against pay for play. Also, high-ranked classes are beginning to stack, 21 to 23. When will this roster finally be considered the highest tier of college football? And then there's another question similar to that from M. Glade 1989 that's, I think, similar to what Anthony's saying here. Is I think they're close, and I think they're there in a lot of positions. Like, there's no team that's great everywhere, including Alabama. There's no team that's great everywhere. Every team has holes. What Notre Dame's recruiting has done lately is they've balanced the roster out, and they're doing a better job of, when one group's not as good as another group, it's not the wide gap that it used to be. And the best player at one position is not significantly better than the next. So, like, for example, in 2015, Notre Dame's top 5 players were as good as anybody's. I said this about 2012 team. There's a big gap in others. So you look at a guy like Jalen Smith and say that's the best linebacker in college football. But the reason they weren't the best linebacker group in college football is because other teams may have had 3 guys that none of them were nearly as good as Jalen Smith. But they were all pretty good football players. Where Notre Dame had Jalen Smith, and then what did you have after that? I still feel like when I watched Jarrett Grace that year a couple times, I still wish they would have played him more. And I don't know if physically he could have done it. Jarrett's been in here a couple times in our chat. I'd love to ask him one of these days, like, if he would have been able to play those kind of snaps, because he's a guy that I thought, if not for his bad injury, could have been really good having him and Jalen Smith next to each other. But even in his limited snaps in 2015, I thought he was better than Joe Schmidt. It's just he didn't get the same amount of snaps because Joe Schmidt was never the same player after his leg injury. And so part of Notre Dame's issues back then were bad luck, with some injuries to certain guys. But you just didn't have the depth at a position that was as good. Like, Tavon Coney and Drew Tranquil, neither of them individually were in the same universe as Jalen Smith, and they would tell you that. Well, at least Drew would anyway. I don't know about Tavon. But that was such a way better linebacker group than the 2015 group because Drew wasn't as good as Jalen at will, but he's still an NFL player. He's still a 4th-round pick, where Tavon was way better than Joe Schmidt. And so it was a better group, even though it didn't have the great individual. And so I think that's what this group is doing. It's kind of stacking depth and in classes on top of each other. It's widening the margin for error at a lot of positions. And the other part of it too, to kind of get to it as well, is the quarterback recruiting is better in this class. I mean, Kenny Minchey's a very good football player, and then next year it's going to be the same thing. So that's kind of how I look at the roster. Now back to the original the first part of the question. I think there's a lot to this. I think that you need to do it more than once. I think having Kyle Hamilton drafted in the 1st round didn't pay off for you the way that you'd think it would, because the last time it happened was over a decade ago, or about a decade ago with Harrison Smith, and there just wasn't a lot in between. The difference between that and other teams is there's a perception of Bama, Georgia, Ohio State just pumping kids out consistently. And I think that's going to be the key to your point. So I do think the draft momentum needs to grow. I think Notre Dame winning more games is point number one. But yes, Notre Dame starting to produce more perceived great college players that then lead to high draft picks is something that could help them out quite a bit. There's no doubt. It's just going to take a few years to get there. This year hopefully helps. My hope is that Isaiah Foskey crushes it in the lead up to the draft and becomes a 1st-round pick. You have him as a 1st-round pick. You have Michael Mayer as a 1st-round pick. That helps. And then you look at some other guys, maybe they don't have the depth that they might need, but you maybe get a couple more guys drafted. It'd certainly be helpful if maybe Jarrett Patterson has a good offseason. Hopefully he can get drafted somewhat high. Ryan would be the guy to kind of talk about that a little bit more. But, then next year you go out and, maybe Joe Walt's a top 10 pick. And you've got some other guys that have a chance that can jump up and be high picks. That's what you hope it is, because as you said, it's about stacking it on top of each other, right, Anthony? And it can't just be 1 or 2 draft classes, or you have a great draft class one year and then the next year it's like nobody, and then the next year's okay, and then the next year's big again. It's that consistency that's going to be key. So very, very good question. Michael, my guy, thank you for this, Michael. He says, a question for Brian and Ryan. Based on what positions recruits Notre Dame missed out on, what positions recruits should be without a doubt Notre Dame target on the 2024 class that needs to be addressed to move the needle? So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, Michael, because we will have a show about this. But and I'm not going to get into specifics, but I'll just quickly kind of discuss the classes that I think I think next year on offense, you need another really good receiver class. And I don't think numbers is as important as maybe getting some of the more high-end guys, like the really needle movers, to complement this group. I think that's very important. And then the rest is just adding impact, just get another impact back. You've already got an impact quarterback. Your offensive line has 1 kid in it. It's not going to be a very deep class. So get some impact guys there. Maybe raise the top level, which is a little bit of the knock on the 2023 group. You're not going to have the numbers and the depth because you're probably going to sign 3, but hopefully it's like higher level. Gearby Lambert's a really toolsy kid. Get a kid like him in there. And then defensively, next year you're definitely going to need some edge players, and that's going to be the thing about that is you're going to need edge players to be impactful. And so you were able to get away with not having it this year. You can't do it 2 years in a row. You need some more elite top level talent. I don't care where it's ranked, but just top level talent like a Justin Scott. Linebacker, just keep doing what you're doing. Corner, just keep doing what you're doing. And then safety. Safety is going to be a big class. You're going to need another big class. But most of it, Michael, at this point in time is just keep doing what you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing at running back. Keep doing what you're doing at tight end. Keep doing what you're doing with Harry Heason on offensive line. Keep doing what you're doing at linebacker. Keep doing what you're doing at corner. The rest, the safety, D-line, receiver are the positions where you need to see a continued upgrade. I would have said quarterback, but they've already got CJ Carr. And so that would have been a big one. Number one, need, if not for the presence of CJ Carr, who's really, really, really good. Milton Fan 15 with a super chat. Thank you very much. Without NIL, is Notre Dame the number 3 recruiting class? Maybe. I don't really want to say yes for sure, because I can't quantify that. I don't think every kid that picks a school, it did it for NIL. I don't think Keon Keeley's driving force, as I've said, his driving force was NIL. Was NIL a factor? Yeah. But some of these kids that were NIL was the only thing, they would have still been getting paid. They just would have been getting paid the way it used to get paid. And that's, that's kind of the deal. So I I think they would have certainly been ranked higher, but like if NIL isn't a thing, who's to say Peyton Bowen still doesn't flip somewhere? I mean, with how he handled himself, like how does he say he doesn't still flip somewhere? I think Keon Keeley still would have been very attracted to Alabama because his vision was, I want to be a high draft pick. I want to be a great football player. I want to be the number one pick in the draft. I'm just saying the hypothetical. He never told me he wanted to be number one pick. But I know that he wants to be an NFL player. I know he wants to be developed to be a very high pick and a great NFL player. That's what he believes is the most important thing for him, which I understand. I mean, you pick a college. If you're not an athlete, you pick a college that you think best develops you at what your chosen profession is. Well, if your chosen profession is football, there's nothing wrong with a kid saying, yeah, I know I could get a great education at Notre Dame, but over here, playing for Lincoln Riley at USC, for example, I don't think USC stacks up against Notre Dame academically when you look at what football players are doing. But if you're a quarterback, your major is football. History would tell us that playing for Lincoln Riley gives you a much better chance of being a high draft pick than playing at Notre Dame. I mean, why is it wrong for a kid to factor that into his decision? I don't think that's wrong. I think it's one of those things you have to look at. And it's like this. And look, Notre Dame benefits from this too. Don't kid yourselves. You can think that the only reason kids come to Notre Dame is because of academics. That's not true. Offensive linemen pick Notre Dame because they know Harry Hiestand is going to turn them into a first-round draft pick, or they believe that to be the case. Kids are coming to play tight end at Notre Dame, not just because of the academics. Sometimes that's true. But there's also kids coming to Notre Dame to play tight end because they want to be the next Michael Mayer or the next Tyler Eifert, meaning first-round draft pick. And it's why Alabama could load up on running backs. It's why Georgia will be like, how do they have 4 5-star running backs? Like, because these kids know, hey, I may not play as a freshman, but when my time comes, I'm going to go be a first-round draft pick, right? If you're a wide receiver at Ohio State, you may pass up playing right now being 1,000 receivers a freshman at a school over here, or you go to Ohio State, maybe you sit a year or two, but when your time comes and you ball out, you're going to be a first-round draft pick, right? And so I think kids can look at that, and it's not a kid being short-sighted or narrow-minded. And I think that's why Notre Dame, Marcus Freeman has said this, we got to show kids 3 things: that they get a great education, which has always been true, that they can compete for a championship, and then we can turn them in the NFL. The fact that he understands that is so important, because why do we hold athletes to a different standard than we hold normal students go to college from the standpoint of why they pick a school? If you want to be if you want to get into business, you'd be foolish not to go to a place like Notre Dame or Wharton or things like that. Why? Because if you can get in there, it's the best of the best at developing you for your future endeavors. If you are someone who wants to be a defensive lineman and you are a football player, football is your number one priority, nothing else really stacks up to it, why would you not look at Alabama and the success they've had turning guys into first-round draft picks? I get that. I just think that some of these kids need to be more bold, in my opinion. And that would have been the only thing I would have said to Keon is, yeah, that's true. I totally get where you're coming from on that. However, your talent is your talent. And you could grow in so many different ways over here as well and still become a first-round draft pick. But I can't fault the kid for looking at it and saying, I want to be a great football player. That place has a long history of developing great football players. I can't fault the kid for that. And so it's not a given that Bama doesn't do what they do, or Georgia doesn't do what they do, or, Tennessee doesn't do what they do if NIL is not a thing. I can't tell you that. And I don't know if it would have mattered with Keon. Maybe it matters with Peyton. I don't know. I don't think anybody should even try to get into that kid's head at this point in time. With some of the schools, Oregon's not where they are. So maybe it moves up to 5 based on the shoddy rankings. Now, in my view, maybe it could be top 5. But like, they didn't miss out on Jason Moore because of NIL. They lost out on Jason Moore because Ohio State out-recruited him. Simple as that. I mean, they didn't buy Jason Moore. They got outplayed. They got out-recruited for him. If you put Jason Moore in this class and who knows where it could be ranked. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that one. I just don't think I can't say for sure. Plus, again, the rankings are faulty in my opinion. And yeah, it's interesting. Here's an interesting comment too. Sometimes I wonder why Keon ever committed Notre Dame. I have to think he didn't think he was an Alabama type of player when he committed. Oh, Keon committed Notre Dame because Keon is a Notre Dame kid. I will take this to my grave. There are very few defensive linemen that I've ever met that in so many ways fit at Notre Dame the way Keon did, in so many different ways. It's just over time, for whatever influences you want to discuss, Keon started putting certain priorities ahead of others. And I'm not saying this is a criticism, this is a reality. He started putting certain priorities over others. And I think that he had been committed to Notre Dame so long that and when he committed, he was not a highly ranked player. Nobody had him in the top 100. He was just this really fun and talented player that had this chance to go get a great education and play football. And I'm sure he thought about the NFL, but when he kind of blew up as a player, I think the reality of, hey, I can really do this for a living. This is just me reading it. I've not been told this isn't intel. It's just my read of it. That he said, this is what I want to do with my life. I want to be a great football player. And the reality is there's this school that's much closer to me than South Bend, Indiana, that has a much better track record of developing kids like me at this thing that I want to be great at. And I think that's ultimately why he decided. Then that's my read. That's my opinion. That's not based on what I've been told. Keon never told me that, that other kind of stuff. I just think that became the priority. But that's because things evolved over time. If you would have asked me, a year ago, 2 years ago when I started this business, you're going to be doing videos every day. I'm doing videos every day. There's no way you're going to do it, right? You're out of your mind. I'm not doing that. Well, things change. Things evolve. You learn different things. You become comfortable with different things. You say, you know what? I actually do think this would be a great idea. People change their mind. And it's not always because of nefarious things. Sometimes it's just my priorities changed. And because my priority changed, I decided to get out of coaching because my priorities changed. That's a fact. I loved coaching. But my priorities as a man, as a husband changed. And I decided I need to do something different. It doesn't mean that doesn't mean I look back and say, well, why'd you even get into coaching in the first place? Because I loved it. It's what I always wanted to do. Right. Well, I wanted to be an astronaut when I was a really little kid. Then after that, I wanted to be a coach. But it was just those things where I had to think about, what did I really want out of life? Was I happy in some other ways? Like, I loved the game. I loved coaching. I loved the Saturdays. I loved, the mental chess match that is coaching and play calling. I hated being on the road all the time. And away from my wife. I hate what it was doing to our marriage. I did not want to be one of those statistics in coaching where, I was married for a while, but, I went places and, she didn't want to be there. And, so I moved on. No, there was nothing more important to me than my wife. And I was not a good husband when I was coaching. It's a fact. Other coaches can be good husbands. I couldn't. And I didn't want to be one of those statistics. So I made the decision, like, this isn't the route I want to go down. Does that mean that I didn't love coaching in the first place? No, it means my priorities changed. And I think sometimes with these kids, that happens. And it's not always because they don't care about academics. They took a bag. That's not always true. And I think it's unfair for us to assume that everything that happens is because a kid took a bag or because a kid doesn't care about something that we think he should care about or something he did care about. And sometimes a kid doesn't care about that anymore. But it doesn't mean it's a bad thing. And so that's why I've always defended Keon, is because I don't agree with his decision. If I was his advisor, I would have advised him to do something different. Even if it wasn't Notre Dame, there's other places I would have had him go other than Alabama. I think Notre Dame, he would have thrived at Notre Dame. So if I was his counselor or the person he leaned on and he listened to me, I would not have pushed for Bama. But what I know of the reasons why he went to Bama, I don't think are what people are saying they are. And his circumstance is different than Peyton's or Dylan Edwards. And that's why how I speak about Keon is so much different than how I speak about other kids. So that's that. So it is what it is. All right, a couple more here. World famous Scotty Nitro, tight end Gilbert from Georgia has entered the portal. Does Notre Dame look at him, or will he be a bag chaser? I don't know if he's going to be a bag chaser or not. There's no way that kid's a fit at Notre Dame, and that's all I'm going to say. No way. Robert McReynolds, Brian, does he stand need to focus on this? What does he stand need to focus on this spring to improve the overall O-line play? Is there a fundamentals issue that he can address, or is it something else? Robert, I think it's just building on what you've done. I think that Coach Heastan really made a great improvement with the line in year one. Now it's about just even furthering establishing who you are. There were things they did fundamentally that sometimes were not always consistent. They would get back to some bad habits. The further along you get away from those, I think the better things can be. So you do this thing that Coach Heastan wants 75% of the time. Eventually, you get up to 80. Eventually, you get up to even higher. There's all types of different things that kind of go into it that make you say, like, look, I don't think they're like, where I think it's like it's doing it repetitively and you don't go back on it to where this is just how you play. And so I think it's a consistency thing, and that takes time to develop. And we saw him pretty quickly turn this into a pretty darn good offensive line. But some of the things that happened late in the year weren't about the offensive line. They were about the other parts of the offense. And that's the key. That's the key for this one. So that's where they got to get better. Let's get to a last couple, and then I got to get out of here. Sean Jeter says, do you still continue to recruit Eli Bowen if you're Notre Dame? I do not. I would not. We've been asked this before. I don't want to keep talking about it, but here's the deal. There's nothing that Eli Bowen could tell me, nothing that his family could tell me that would make me think that we're not going to have the same thing happen again. It's just that. It's just that. So I just – and I don't mean that disrespectfully. From everything I've been told, Eli's a really good kid. And I've got no reason to believe that. But the reality is I just can't. I can't get burned again on that one. Just can't. So I would move on. M. Glade 1989. Oh, we actually answered that one already. So we're going to get back up here. We'll end this with Mark's super chat down here. Actually, we have another super chat down here that I'll get to as well. And then we're going to get out of here. So Mark won with super chat. Thank you, Mark. $5 towards Ryan's raise. What are your thoughts on hiring a quarterbacks coach like other teams do to help the OC and work only with the quarterbacks? I'm okay with where they are now, because the reality is if you're going to hire a quarterbacks coach, that means you have to fire someone on your current staff, because you can only have 10 assistants. So my question would be, who would you get rid of? And where would you have Tommy Rees coach? Because the offensive staff already has more than the defensive staff. So how would you change it? I don't think you can. I think there may be somebody that could where I would make an impact is I would hire an analyst or a GA, which they've kind of done, but it's hard to hire a GA that has experience coaching quarterbacks. But I would hire an analyst that can maybe help take some of the load off of Coach Rees from a quarterback standpoint. But, look, we can spend every single show talking about Tom Rees coaching the quarterbacks, and I get it. He's got to do a better job. I think part of this is just to Coach Rees continue to evolve as a coach. He's 30, right? I mean, he's going to get better. He's going to improve. He's going to learn from his mistakes and get better. Let's see how it develops. And he can't keep doing what he's doing, because like what he's doing is not good enough. And I would hope that he would tell us that too. But I still just feel like there's potential to get there. And I'm willing to give him another season to go out and prove it. And if he doesn't, then to the point you kind of say, oh, this just is what he is. But hopefully he promotes, he gets better. Chen Boat says with a super chat, thank you very much. I'm loving the IB hoodie there in the shirt, the show right there. Brian, you are a machine. Thanks to all IB staff. Keep up the good work. Merry Christmas. Go Irish. I appreciate that very much. And I'm a machine that's about to break down. That's why we're going to wrap this show up here very soon. Very, very soon. But I appreciate that. And then a couple other things. I've seen some people ask about not getting confirmation on orders. If you have not got a confirmation order, shoot me an email at brian@irishbreakdown.com. We had automatic mail that went out. I don't know what happened to that. I'm going to have to get with my tech team to find out why those are not automatically triggering, because a lot of people are reaching out saying they're not getting that. So we'll fix that. But if you email me, I can go into the order form, find out if your order went through, and then I can get you the tracking number and send it to you. And then we'll work on trying to fix why those automatic emails are not being sent out again. So I do apologize for that. We'll get that fixed. But if you have a question about when your merch store orders are going to be arrived, just shoot me an email and I'll let you know, and we'll get that figured out as soon as possible. So I appreciate your orders. Makes AK with the message, folks. Please join the message board. Hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, leave a 5-star review, visit the IB store for great Christmas gifts, and as always, go Irish. Thanks for being with us, everybody. 6 o'clock tonight, 36 minutes. It's going to be the IB Nation Sports Talk Show. You're going to want to definitely check that out. And thank you all for all your support throughout this last couple days. I'm going to kind of check out here for a little bit and get some rest, get some work done. Make sure you're locked into irishbreakdown.com to get all of our latest content. Have a great rest of your day, folks, and thanks for joining us on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.